Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I was scrolling through my phone late at night when the notification popped up. A friend request from someone with my exact name stared back at me. At first, I thought it was a glitch or some kind of mistake, but when I clicked on the profile, my stomach dropped. The profile picture was mine, the cover photo was mine, and every detail matched perfectly. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I scrolled through the page. My posts, my photos, even updates from years ago were all there. It wasn't just a copy of my profile, it was my profile, down to the smallest detail. The only difference was that I had never made it. I checked my account, making sure I hadn't been hacked. Everything was normal. My real profile was still active, untouched. So who had created this? And more importantly, why? I went back to the duplicate account and clicked on the friend list, expecting to see random strangers. But there were no friends except one, me. A wave of unease washed over me as I stared at the screen. It had only one friend request sent, and it was to me. No other connections, no mutual friends, just a perfect copy of my life, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I hesitated, then clicked the report button. The next morning, I checked again, expecting the account to be gone. It wasn't. The friend request was still pending. A sick feeling settled in my gut as I refreshed the page. This time, something had changed. The account had posted a status update. "Why won't you add me?" My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen the profile make any posts before, and now it was directly addressing me. My mind raced for an explanation. Was this some elaborate prank? A scam? But why was it so personal? My hands trembled as I blocked the account, hoping that would be the end of it. That night, another notification appeared. A new friend request. From the same profile. My heart pounded as I reopened the app, dreading what I would see. The block hadn't worked. The profile still existed, still identical to mine, and it had sent the request again. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Then I clicked the profile once more. The cover photo had changed. It was a picture I had never taken, never seen before. A photo of me sitting in my room staring at my phone just like I was at that moment. My stomach twisted as I backed out of the app. This wasn't possible. I scanned the room, my pulse hammering in my ears. There was no one else here, no way for someone to take that picture. But the image was there, clear as day. I checked every inch of my room, searching for cameras, for anything that could explain what was happening. But nothing was out of place. I convinced myself it had to be a manipulated image, someone using my photos to create something fake. But deep down, I wasn't sure. For the next few days, the profile kept sending requests. Every time I blocked it, it came back. Each time it posted a new photo, images of me in real time, capturing moments I hadn't even been aware of. I stopped sleeping properly, afraid of what I might see next. Then one night my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. This time the profile had sent a message, just 2 words. "I'm outside." A cold sweat broke out on my skin as I turned toward my window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, but that didn't make me feel any safer. The street below was empty, the sidewalk stretching into darkness. I forced myself to breathe, trying to stay rational. I shut off my phone and double-checked the locks. I wasn't going to let paranoia get the best of me. But as I turned to walk back to my room, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "Why won't you let me in?" That was enough. I called the police, trying to explain the situation without sounding insane. They agreed to send someone to check the area, though I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. Still, I waited, gripping my phone like a lifeline. When the officers arrived, they found nothing. No signs of anyone outside, no disturbances, nothing. One of them suggested it was a case of online harassment, advising me to stay offline for a while. I nodded, but I knew it wasn't that simple. After they left, I hesitated before checking my phone again. The fake profile was gone, completely erased, as if it had never existed. No posts, no messages, nothing. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on. I convinced myself it had been some elaborate hoax, something explainable, even if I never figured out the reason behind it. I started sleeping better, using my phone without fear. The sense of unease slowly faded. Then, one evening, as I was scrolling through my notifications, a new friend request appeared. My blood ran cold as I saw the name, my name. The profile picture was different this time. It wasn't just another stolen image, it was me. Not a picture I had ever taken, not an old post, just me standing at my front door, smiling, looking directly into the camera. Story 2. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I noticed something strange in my camera roll. A new photo had appeared, one I didn't remember taking. My breath hitched as I tapped on it, and my stomach twisted into a tight knot. It was a selfie of a man I had never seen before, taken inside my apartment. He was standing in my living room, directly in front of the couch. The lighting was dim, the angle slightly off, as if he had taken it in a hurry. His face was blank, expressionless, with dark eyes staring straight into the camera. My hands felt clammy as I swiped up to check the timestamp. It had been taken at 3:14 a.m. while I had been asleep in the next room. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. My front door was locked, my windows shut. There was no sign of a break-in. I glanced around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every creak in the walls. Had someone been inside my apartment last night? I threw off the covers and hurried to check the locks. The deadbolt was still in place. The chain was latched. I moved to the windows, running my fingers along the edges, but they were all secured. There was no way someone had come in, at least no way that made sense. I opened my security app and scrolled through the footage. The camera in my living room showed nothing unusual. No movement, no unfamiliar figures. But the photo was proof someone had been here. I switched to the bedroom camera, my fingers shaking as I fast-forwarded through the night. At 3:14 a.m., the footage glitched. A full 5 seconds of static before the feed returned to normal. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, willing the missing footage to return. There was no logical explanation for it. I checked my phone's location history, my app usage, nothing. It was as if the photo had appeared out of nowhere. I couldn't stay here. Grabbing my keys, I left the apartment and sat in my car, locking the doors behind me. The parking lot was empty, the early morning air thick with silence. I stared at the photo again, memorizing every detail. The man's face was unfamiliar, but something about him unsettled me. The longer I looked, the more I felt like I had seen him before. I called my best friend, Sarah, and told her everything. "That's insane," she said. "Are you sure you didn't take it by accident?" "Why would I take a picture of a stranger in my own apartment?" I snapped. "And even if I had, how did he get in?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Maybe someone hacked your phone," she suggested. "Sent the photo to mess with you." That explanation made more sense than anything else, but it still didn't explain the glitch in the security footage, or the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling I had seen the man before. I decided to go to the leasing office and ask if they had security cameras in the hallways. If someone had broken in, there had to be footage. The manager, Mrs. Patel, frowned as she checked the logs. "No one entered your apartment last night," she said. "The only recorded entry is your key fob." I swallowed hard. "And the hallway cameras?" She clicked through the footage, eyes narrowing. Nothing unusual. No visitors, no suspicious activity. I left the office feeling worse than before. If no one had entered, if the cameras showed nothing, then how had the photo gotten on my phone? I drove to a nearby coffee shop, needing to be anywhere but home. As I sipped my drink, I did a reverse image search on the photo, hoping for some kind of lead. Nothing. No matches, no records. It was as if the man didn't exist. I spent the rest of the day out avoiding my apartment, but I couldn't avoid it forever. As night fell, I forced myself to go back. The air inside felt heavier, as if the walls were holding something unspoken. I checked every closet, every corner, but everything was as I had left it. I placed my phone on the nightstand and tried to sleep, but the unease never left. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. I woke up to my phone vibrating against the wood. Groggy, I reached for it and squinted at the screen. A new notification. My stomach clenched as I saw what it was. Another photo. With trembling fingers, I opened my camera roll. My breath hitched. It was another selfie, same man, same blank stare. But this time, he wasn't in the living room. He was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering in my chest. My eyes darted to the door, but it was closed. I checked the locks again, untouched. My security app showed no movement. But the photo was there, time-stamped just minutes ago. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, not stopping until I was in my car. My hands shook as I called Sarah again. He was in my room, I choked out. He took another picture. "I don't know what to do." "Get out of there," she said immediately. "Come stay at my place. We'll figure this out in the morning." I didn't need to be told twice. I drove straight to Sarah's apartment, checking my rearview mirror the entire way. When I arrived, she took one look at my face and pulled me inside. We spent hours combing through every possible explanation. Maybe my phone had been hacked. Maybe I was sleepwalking. But no theory fit. There was no logical way for those photos to exist. Around 3 a.m., I hesitantly checked my camera roll again. My stomach dropped. Another new photo. This one was different. It wasn't a selfie. It was a picture of me sleeping in Sarah's guest room. Tears pricked my eyes as I turned the phone toward her. "How is this happening?" I whispered. Sarah's face had gone pale. She grabbed her phone and started dialing the police, but before she could press call, my phone buzzed again. A text message. No number, no contact name, just 2 words. "Found you." Story 3. I first noticed the footsteps about a week after the apartment upstairs was emptied. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe the old tenants had left something behind, and maintenance was checking in. But the noises didn't come during the day when workers would normally be around. They came at night, long after the building had gone quiet. It started around midnight, a slow, deliberate pacing that moved from one end of the apartment to the other. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, following the sound as it made its way across my room. The steps were too steady, too heavy to be the old pipes or settling wood. It was unmistakably the sound of someone walking. The first few nights I tried to ignore it. Maybe someone had access to the place management showing it to potential renters. But the leasing office had a strict policy. No one was allowed inside after hours. And yet, every night, the footsteps returned. One evening, I finally asked my neighbor, Mrs. Carter, if she had noticed anything strange. She was in her 70s, had lived in the building for decades, and knew just about everything that went on. She frowned, shaking her head. "That place has been locked up since the last tenant left," she said. "No one's been up there." Oh. I felt a chill creep down my spine. "You haven't heard anything?" I asked. She gave me a knowing look. "This building is old," she said. "Old buildings make noises." But something in her voice told me she didn't believe that either. That night, I stayed up later than usual, determined to catch whoever or whatever was up there. Midnight came, and like clockwork, the footsteps began. Slow, deliberate, moving across the floor above me. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the broom from the corner. I banged the handle against my ceiling 3 times, hard enough to shake the light fixture. The footsteps stopped. The silence was thick, pressing, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe I had scared them off. Then, just above my head, came 3 slow knocks in response. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. The air in my apartment suddenly felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I wanted to believe it was a prank, maybe a squatter who had found a way inside. But there was something about the way the knocks had come so deliberate, so measured, that sent ice through my veins. I barely slept that night. The next morning I went straight to the leasing office. The woman at the desk, Danielle, gave me a curious look as I explained the situation. "That unit is empty," she said, clicking through her computer. "It's been vacant for almost 4 months." "Are you sure?" I asked. "No maintenance? No cleaning crew going in at night?" She shook her head. "No one's had access since the last tenant moved out." She paused, then lowered her voice. "But you're not the first person to ask about that apartment." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then sighed. "The last guy who lived there broke his lease early," she said. "He came in one morning, pale as a ghost, said he couldn't stay another night. When we asked why, all he said was, 'There's something in there.'" I left the office feeling worse than before. That night I locked my bedroom door and kept my phone within arm's reach. Midnight came, and right on cue, the footsteps started again. But this time they didn't just pace back and forth. They stopped directly above me. I held my breath, gripping the edge of my blanket like it would protect me. A long, stretching silence filled the room, thick with anticipation. Then, slowly, the sound of something dragging scraped across the floor above. It wasn't the sound of furniture being moved. It was heavier, slower, like something was being pulled inch by inch across the wooden floor. My entire body tensed, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop. But then another sound joined it. A creaking, rhythmic, like the slow swing of a rocking chair. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed, threw on my shoes, and bolted out of my apartment. The hallway was dead silent, empty, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. I stood there for a long moment, debating my next move, then forced myself to climb the stairs to the apartment above. The door was locked. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence, no footsteps, no creaking, just the low hum of the building settling. Gathering my courage, I knocked, half expecting someone to answer. But the door creaked open on its own. A rush of stale air hit me, thick with dust and something deeper, something rotten. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no curtains, just bare walls and a wooden floor coated in a thin layer of dust. But there, in the middle of the room, was a single chair. It rocked slightly, as if someone had just been sitting in it. My stomach turned. I stepped back, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. That's when I saw them footprints in the dust, leading from the chair to the spot directly above my bedroom. I didn't stay to see anything else. I turned and ran, slamming the door shut behind me. By morning, I had already called the leasing office, telling them I was breaking my lease. I didn't care about the penalties. I just needed to leave. As I packed my things, I tried to tell myself that it was just an old building making noises, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. But the last night I spent there, as I lay on my mattress surrounded by boxes, the footsteps came again. Only this time, they weren't upstairs. They were right outside my door. Story 4. The Uber arrived just as the app said it would. A black sedan, clean, nothing out of the ordinary. The driver, a middle-aged man with a short beard and tired eyes, gave me a nod as I slid into the back seat. He confirmed my destination and I settled in, glancing at my phone. The car moved smoothly through the city, the glow of streetlights flickering across the windows. The GPS on his dashboard showed the estimated time 20 minutes. I leaned back, scrolling through messages, barely paying attention to the turns we took. Then, after a few minutes, I noticed something strange. The driver veered off the suggested route, turning onto a dimly lit street. I frowned, watching the GPS recalculate. The estimated time didn't change much, but the path was completely different. "Hey," I said, leaning forward slightly. The GPS had us going the other way. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression calm. "I know a shortcut," he said. His voice was even, almost too casual. He didn't sound reassuring. He sounded rehearsed. I forced a small laugh, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, really? I take this route a lot, and I've never seen a shortcut." My fingers tightened around my phone. The buildings outside looked unfamiliar, more spread apart, fewer streetlights. The driver didn't respond right away. He kept driving, his hand steady on the wheel. "It'll save us time," he said after a moment. His tone was final, like the conversation was over. A cold unease settled in my stomach. I glanced at the app. The GPS still showed the original route, and we were definitely off course. I tapped the screen, watching as the little blue dot moved farther away from main roads. "Where did you get back on the main route?" I asked, forcing a polite tone. "I don't mind the extra time." The driver didn't answer. He just kept driving. My pulse quickened as I watched the scenery shift. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by long stretches of dark road. The occasional street lamp flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows along the cracked pavement. My fingers hovered over the share trip option on the app. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I think I'll just get out here," I said. "I don't mind walking the rest of the way." He didn't slow down. A sharp chill ran through me. I tapped the screen, sending my location to a friend. My heart pounded as I forced myself to stay calm. "Did you hear me?" I said, louder this time. "I want to get out." He sighed, a long, heavy exhale. Then, finally, he spoke. "It's not safe to walk here," he said. "Trust me." Trust him. Every instinct in my body screamed not to. The road ahead stretched into darkness, no sign of other cars. My fingers trembled as I opened my messages, typing fast. "Something's wrong. Driver won't let me out." The car slowed at a red light, the only one we had hit in a while. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Then, without thinking, I grabbed the door handle and pulled. It didn't open. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. The locks. He had locked the doors. The light turned green, and he accelerated again, his face unreadable in the mirror. "Relax," he said. "You'll be fine." Panic surged through me. I gripped my phone, my mind racing. I could call the police, but what if he heard me? What if he took my phone? I turned slightly, trying to see if there was an unlock button near my door. There wasn't. Then up ahead I saw a gas station. Bright lights, a small store, a few cars parked outside. My heart leapt. If I could just get there. I took a shaky breath, forcing my voice to stay level. "Can we stop at that gas station?" I asked. "I really need to use the bathroom." The driver's fingers flexed on the wheel. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Fine," he said. "Make it quick." Relief and fear tangled in my chest as he pulled into the lot. The moment the car slowed, I moved. My hand shot to the door handle, yanking frantically. He had unlocked the doors, but I didn't wait to question why. I threw myself out, nearly stumbling as my legs hit the pavement. I rushed toward the gas station, not daring to look back. My lungs burned, my hands shaking. Inside, the cashier looked up, startled. "Help," I gasped. "Call the police." I turned, glancing out the window. The Uber was gone. The police arrived quickly, asking for details. I showed them the trip on my phone, but something was wrong. The route didn't match what had happened. The logs showed we had followed the original GPS path. No detours, no shortcut. My stomach twisted. It didn't make sense. The cops took my statement, promising to investigate. But the driver's profile was already gone from the app. It was as if he had never existed. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying it. The wrong turn, the locked doors, the eerie calm in his voice. I checked my app again, looking for anything I had missed. Then I saw an old notification I hadn't noticed before. "Your ride has been canceled." But I had never canceled it. The timestamp showed it had happened 5 minutes after I got into the car. My blood ran cold. If my ride had been canceled, then whose car had I gotten into? Story 5. The morning of my birthday started like any other. My phone buzzed with the usual notifications, friends and family sending well wishes, social media reminding everyone of the date. I scrolled through the messages, smiling at some and responding to others. But then, a text appeared that made my breath hitch. It was a simple message: "Happy birthday. We miss you." The number was unfamiliar, just a string of digits that didn't match anyone in my contacts. A strange unease settled over me as I stared at the words. There was something unsettling about the way it was phrased, like it was from someone I had lost. I hesitated before calling the number, my fingers cold against the screen. The line rang once before an automated voice told me the number was disconnected. I pulled the phone away, frowning, my pulse quickening. It didn't make sense. How could someone send a message from a number that didn't exist? A creeping sensation settled into my chest, but I tried to shake it off. It was probably a prank or a wrong number, nothing more. I set the phone down and tried to go about my day, but the message lingered in my mind. The way it was written felt personal, like whoever sent it knew me. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At lunch, I glanced around the cafe, scanning the faces of strangers, wondering if someone was nearby. The thought was irrational, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing unease. Something about that message felt deliberate. Later that evening, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. The message still sat in my inbox untouched. I decided to search the number online, hoping it would lead to some explanation. But nothing came up, no records, no previous reports, just a dead end. As the hours passed, I tried to push it from my mind. I told myself it was probably a mistake, maybe even a telemarketing trick. But then, just past midnight, my phone buzzed again. My stomach twisted as I picked it up, my breath catching in my throat. It was the same number, the same message. Happy birthday. We miss you. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Someone was playing a game with me, but I didn't know why. I called the number again, gripping the phone tightly. This time there wasn't even a ring, just immediate silence, as if the call had been swallowed by the void. A chill ran down my spine, and I slowly lowered the phone. I tried to sleep, but every creak of my apartment made me jump. The message played over and over in my mind, and with it, an old memory surfaced, one I had buried for years. A car accident when I was a child. The twisted metal, the flashing lights, the voices calling my name. I hadn't thought about it in years. I had survived, but my parents hadn't. The weight of the realization hit me like a stone. The message had said, "We miss you." A cold dread settled deep in my bones. I turned my phone off, pressing it face down on the nightstand. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, exhaustion won. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window, the weight of last night's events still heavy in my chest. Hesitantly, I turned my phone back on, half expecting another message, but there was nothing. The previous messages were gone, as if they had never existed. My hand shook as I scrolled through my inbox, but they had completely vanished. I checked my call log, but the attempts to call back weren't there either. My stomach twisted with unease. Had I imagined it? Had my mind played some cruel trick on me? For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had received a message from something beyond my understanding. Maybe it was a coincidence, a glitch, or maybe someone was trying to reach me. But the worst part was knowing that if they ever sent another message, I wasn't sure if I would respond. Story 6. I first noticed the van at a red light on Elm Street. It was a black cargo van, unmarked, with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about it felt off. As I drove through the intersection, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The van followed at a steady distance, keeping just far enough back that it wouldn't seem obvious. I turned onto Maple Avenue, and a few moments later, it did too. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Maybe it was a coincidence. I told myself not to be paranoid, but I took an unexpected right onto Oak Drive just to see. A few seconds later, the van made the same turn. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was following me. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it just a random driver going the same way, or was this something more? I took another sharp left, then a right, weaving through back streets in an attempt to shake it. Each time I checked the mirror, the van remained steady and patient. It never got too close, but it never disappeared either. I reached into my bag for my phone and quickly typed a message to my best friend, Emily. Before I could hit send, the screen flashed low battery and died in my hands. My stomach sank. I had no way to call for help. I needed to get to a public place. The grocery store was a few blocks ahead, and I pressed harder on the gas, my heart pounding. If I could just get inside, maybe I could lose whoever was in that van. Pulling into the parking lot, I parked near the entrance and jumped out, looking over my shoulder. The van slowed as it passed the lot, but it didn't stop. I watched it turn the corner and disappear. I exhaled sharply, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe they had just been heading in the same direction. But I still felt uneasy. I stayed inside the store longer than I needed to, wandering the aisles to give the van time to leave. When I finally stepped back outside, I scanned the lot carefully. No sign of it. Feeling a bit calmer, I got into my car and pulled out. I took a different route home, avoiding the streets where I had first noticed the van. I kept checking the mirror, but everything seemed normal. Then, 2 blocks from my apartment, my blood ran cold. The black van was back. It had been waiting. Panic surged through me. I couldn't go home, not if they knew where I lived. I made a split-second decision and turned abruptly onto a side street, speeding up. The van followed. I took another sharp turn, hoping to lose them, but they matched my every move. My heart pounded as I tried to think. I needed to get somewhere safe. Then I saw a police station up ahead. Without hesitation, I turned into the lot, tires screeching. I parked right in front, practically jumping out of my car. The van slowed as it passed. I watched as it hesitated, then kept driving, disappearing down the road. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. After a few moments, I went inside and spoke to the officer at the front desk. I explained everything: the van, the way it had followed me, how it had waited for me to leave the store. He took down my information and asked if I had noticed a license plate. My stomach sank as I realized I hadn't. My focus had been on escaping, not on details. The officer reassured me they would keep an eye out and suggested I have someone walk me to my car for the next few days. I nodded, but dread still sat heavy in my chest. That night, I double-checked every lock on my doors and windows. I closed all the blinds and kept the lights off. Every little noise outside made me jump. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that van in my mirror following me through darkened streets. I kept checking the window, expecting to see it parked outside. The next morning, I left for work cautiously, scanning the street before getting into my car. The van wasn't there. Maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had given up. But as I pulled onto the main road, I felt my stomach drop. A black van sat parked on the opposite side of the street. The windows were too dark to see inside, but I knew. It was them, and they were still watching. Story 7. I always lock my windows before bed. It's a habit, something I do without thinking. Living alone, I take my security seriously, double-checking the locks every night before I turn off the lights. That's why, when I woke up and noticed the window near my bed opened just an inch, my entire body went cold. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The air coming through the crack was cool, carrying the faint scent of the damp grass outside. I stared at the window, trying to remember if I had somehow forgotten to lock it. But I knew I hadn't. I never did. A deep unease settled in my stomach as I got out of bed. My apartment wasn't big, just a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor, but suddenly, it felt too vast, too quiet. I moved carefully, checking the front door, the other windows, and even the closet. Everything else was as I had left it, just that one window cracked open. I pushed it shut and locked it again, testing it twice to make sure it wouldn't budge. Maybe I had made a mistake, I told myself. Maybe I had been tired last night and didn't click it all the way. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. That night, I was more careful than ever. I checked the window lock 3 times before climbing into bed. My apartment was silent except for the occasional creak of the building settling. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening for anything out of place. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. The next morning, the window was open again. This time I felt a sharp jolt of fear as I stared at the small gap. My hands trembled as I reached out and tested the lock. It was still engaged. My breath hitched. Someone had unlocked it. Someone had opened it. I stepped back, my mind racing. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. No fire escape, no easy way up. The only way someone could have opened it was if they had been inside. My stomach twisted at the thought. I forced myself to check every inch of my apartment, pulling open cabinets, yanking back the shower curtain. Nothing. I called the building manager. He listened to my story, then sighed. "It's an old building," he said. "Sometimes the locks don't hold right." "That doesn't make sense," I insisted. "It was locked when I went to bed." He promised to send maintenance to check it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That night, I wedged a chair against the window, pressing it firmly into place. I needed to know if it was really just a faulty lock or if someone was coming inside. I barely slept, my ears straining for any sound. Morning came, and the window was open again. The chair hadn't moved. I stared at it, dread creeping up my spine. If the chair hadn't shifted, how had the window opened? It wasn't just a faulty lock. Someone or something wanted it open. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I installed a small camera facing the window. It wasn't fancy, but it would record any movement. I kept checking it throughout the night, watching the live feed from my phone. The window remained shut. Nothing happened. Sometime around 3 a.m. I finally dozed off. When I woke up, the window was open again. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, heart pounding as I scrolled through the footage. The video showed nothing for hours. Then, just after 2:58 a.m., the feed flickered. For 3 full minutes, the screen went black. When the feed returned, the window was open. A cold dread settled over me. Someone or something had been in my apartment and my camera hadn't even caught it. I called the police. They arrived quickly, checked every room, every corner. Nothing was stolen, nothing out of place. No sign of forced entry. "Could be a prank," one of the officers said, glancing at my window. "Or maybe you've been sleepwalking." I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But they didn't believe me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, gripping my phone, watching the window. Hours passed. At 2:58 a.m. my phone screen flickered. The camera feed cut out. I held my breath, staring at the darkened screen. The room felt colder, like something unseen was standing just beyond my vision. My heart pounded as I listened. The silence stretched, heavy and unnatural. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak. I turned toward the window. It was moving. Not fast, not suddenly. Just barely shifting, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. My chest tightened. The air felt wrong, thick and heavy. The window slid open another inch. I couldn't breathe. My muscles locked in place as I watched, helpless. Then the whisper came. Soft, almost playful, right next to my ear. "You left it open for me." I scrambled out of bed, my pulse hammering. My hands fumbled for the light switch, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely turn it on. When the room flooded with light, there was nothing there. The window was shut. I was done. I packed a bag, booked a hotel, and left my apartment that night. The building manager didn't seem surprised when I told him I was breaking my lease. He just nodded, muttering something about that unit having problems. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I moved across the city, found a new place, a newer building with better locks. I told myself it was over, that whatever had been in that apartment, it wasn't following me. Then, last night I woke up. The air in my bedroom felt too cold. My skin prickled as I turned my head toward the window. It was open, just an inch. Story 8. The sound drifted in through my open bedroom window, soft at first, barely noticeable. It was a melody I recognized, the familiar jingle of an ice cream truck. But it was almost 2 in the morning, and no ice cream truck should be out this late. I sat up in bed, listening, my skin prickling as the music grew louder. Sliding out from under the covers, I crept to the window and peered out. The street was dark except for the occasional glow of a porch light. Then, just beyond the corner, I saw it. A white ice cream truck, its faded decals peeling from the metal, rolling slowly down the street. Its headlights were dim, barely illuminating the pavement ahead. The truck moved at a crawl, almost as if it were looking for something. The music played on, tinny and warped, like an old cassette left in the sun too long. I expected to see children running toward it, but of course there were none. No one else was awake. No one else seemed to notice. I stepped away from the window, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just a prank, some weirdo driving around for laughs. But something about it felt off. The way it moved. The way the music played just a little too slow, as if the tape was stretched. I swallowed hard and pulled my curtains shut, trying to ignore the creeping unease spreading through me. The music continued for several minutes, circling the block, fading, then returning. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. Eventually it did. The last few notes hung in the air before silence took over. I closed my eyes, telling myself it was nothing, just some late-night oddity, something I'd forget by morning. But the next night, it came back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, that same off-kilter jingle, distant but drawing closer. My stomach clenched as I spit into the sink and wiped my mouth. I rushed to the window, parting the blinds just enough to see outside. The truck was there again, rolling slowly past the houses, its engine barely making a sound. This time I noticed something else. The driver's window was open, but I couldn't see who was inside. The darkness inside the cab was too deep, too empty. My fingers tightened on the blinds as I watched. The truck stopped in front of my house, idling. The music played on, the chimes discordant and wrong. I stepped back, my breath shallow. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. I waited, barely daring to move, as the truck sat there, motionless. Then, after what felt like forever, it started rolling again, disappearing down the street. The music trailed off until there was nothing left but the hum of my refrigerator and the pounding of my pulse in my ears. I barely slept that night. By the third night, I knew it would come. I sat by my window waiting, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The neighborhood was quiet, walls quiet, dark. I checked the clock, 1:53 a.m., right on time. The jingle started up again, the familiar, twisted melody filling the night air. The truck appeared at the end of the street, moving like a ghost, its tires barely making a sound on the pavement. I swallowed hard, pressing myself against the wall, watching as it crept closer. It stopped in front of my house again, idling. The music continued, looping over and over, each note more warped than the last. Then, for the first time, the music cut off. The silence was worse. I held my breath. A long moment passed. Then the driver's door creaked open. My stomach twisted as I saw movement, someone stepping out. The figure was tall, thin, their movements deliberate. The street lamp cast long shadows over them, obscuring their face. They stood there for a moment, head tilted toward my house. Then they took a step forward. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my breath coming in short gasps. The operator picked up, but before I could speak, the music started again. Loud, deafening. It blasted through the night, drowning out everything else. I pressed the phone to my ear, but the call had disconnected. The screen was frozen, stuck on the dial screen. My heart pounded as I looked back toward the window. The figure was gone. The truck was gone. The music had stopped. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next day, I asked around. No one else had heard the music. No one else had seen the truck. I checked online for reports, but there was nothing. It was as if it had never been there. That night, I didn't wait by the window. I locked my doors, closed every curtain, and sat on the couch with every light on. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled me under. At 1:53 a.m., I woke up. The music was playing again, right outside my house. It was louder this time, rattling the windows, filling every inch of space. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body frozen in place. The air felt heavy, charged, as if something was pressing down on me. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. I didn't sleep for days. Eventually, the truck stopped coming, but I never felt safe again. Some nights I think I hear it in the distance, just beyond my neighborhood. The faintest hint of that eerie jingle, floating through the air. And I know, deep down, that one night it will come back. Story 9. I noticed it while washing dishes. The knife block sat in its usual place on the counter, every slot filled except one. My largest kitchen knife was missing. I frowned, wiping my hands on a towel as I scanned the counter, convinced I must have left it out after cooking. I checked the sink first, but it wasn't there. I opened the dishwasher, thinking maybe I had put it in without remembering, but it wasn't there either. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I lived alone and I always kept my knives in the same place. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe I had misplaced it somewhere unusual, though that was unlike me. I opened every drawer, even the ones I rarely used, but the knife was nowhere to be found. My apartment was small, with only so many places it could be. I walked to the living room, scanning the coffee table, then the side tables near my couch. There was no reason for it to be there, but I was growing desperate to find it. A knife didn't just disappear. I retraced my steps, trying to recall the last time I had used it. It had been 2 nights ago. I had made dinner, washed the dishes, and put everything away as usual. I never left knives out, especially not the largest one. My pulse quickened as an uncomfortable thought formed. If I hadn't moved it, then who had? I locked my front door every night, checked it twice out of habit. There were no signs of forced entry, no open windows, nothing out of place. Still, my skin prickled with unease. Someone had taken that knife, and I had no idea when or why. I checked my bedroom next, even though I knew it was absurd. My closet doors were shut, just as I had left them. I hesitated before opening them, half expecting something or someone to be inside. But the space was empty, just my clothes hanging neatly in a row. I turned toward my bed, crouching down to peer underneath. Dust, forgotten shoes, and an old book one had dropped months ago. Nothing else. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I had just overlooked it in the kitchen. I went back, searching the counters again, then the trash can, in case I had accidentally thrown it away. Still nothing. A deep sense of unease settled in my chest. I decided to check my door locks again, just to reassure myself. Both were secure, deadbolt engaged, chain still in place. I shook my head, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't being irrational, something had changed in my home without my doing. I just had no way of proving it. That night, I went to bed feeling more unsettled than I had in a long time. Every creak of the apartment building felt louder. Every shadow seemed longer. I locked my bedroom door, something I had never done before, and kept my phone on the nightstand within reach. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every possible explanation for the missing knife. I told myself I had simply misplaced it, that it would turn up in a stupid place, and I would feel foolish for worrying. But a deeper part of me knew better. Sometime in the night, I woke to a sound. A faint creak, like weight shifting on the floorboards outside my room. My heart pounded. I held my breath, straining to hear. The apartment was silent again, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I reached for my phone with shaky hands. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow across my room. 3:12 a.m. I debated calling someone, but who would I call? The police. And say what? That I had lost a knife and heard a noise. I stayed still, listening. Another sound, closer this time. A soft, deliberate step. My throat tightened. Someone was in my apartment. I gripped my phone and moved as quietly as I could, stepping out of bed. My heart pounded in my ears. I pressed my ear to the door, barely breathing. Silence. I hesitated, then slowly turned the lock, easing the door open just an inch. The hallway was dark, the kitchen barely visible in the dim light from the window. My stomach dropped. The knife was back. It sat on the counter, exactly where it should have been. Clean, untouched. But I knew it hadn't been there before. My knees felt weak. I wasn't alone. Someone had been here, maybe still was. I forced myself to move, stepping cautiously into the hallway. The living room was empty, but the front door was unlocked. My hands trembled as I reached for it, checking the chain. It was still latched, meaning whoever had entered hadn't left that way. My breath came in short gasps. The bathroom, the closet, places someone could still be hiding. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my keys and phone, then pulled the door open and ran. My bare feet hit the cold hallway floor as I sprinted toward the stairwell, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the building's lobby. The security guard looked up from his desk, startled. "You okay?" he asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. Someone was in my apartment. His expression hardened, and he immediately grabbed his radio. Within minutes, another guard arrived, and they followed me back upstairs. My hands shook as I unlocked the door, bracing myself for what we would find. The apartment was just as I had left it. The knife still on the counter. The windows locked. The closets empty. But the feeling lingered, like the air itself was holding its breath. One of the guards studied the door, frowning. No signs of forced entry. I nodded, my mouth dry. But the knife, it was gone before. Now it's back. The other guard exchanged a look with his partner. "Maybe you misplaced it," he offered. "Or someone played a prank." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But I knew the truth. Someone had been inside, and they hadn't just taken something. They had put it back. I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. I packed a bag and stayed in a hotel, locking and relocking the door more times than I could count. The next day, I changed my locks, added extra security, and even installed cameras. For weeks, nothing happened, but every night, I still checked the knife block before going to bed. And every morning I woke up wondering if, one day, something else would go missing. Or worse, if I would wake up to find something added instead. Story 10. The email from my apartment complex arrived while I was at work. The subject line reading, "Security alert, unidentified individual near your unit." My stomach tightened as I clicked it open, my heart pounding before I even read the message. The building manager had attached a screenshot from the security footage, showing a man standing directly outside my apartment door. The timestamp showed he had been there for nearly an hour. I stared at the image, my fingers cold against my phone. The man's posture was unnatural too still. His head slightly tilted like he was listening for something. His face was obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt, but I could tell he wasn't just passing by. He had been waiting, watching. I scrolled down, reading the manager's message. They wanted to confirm whether I knew the person, or if I had any visitors that night. My pulse quickened as I typed back, "I don't know him. I wasn't expecting anyone. Do you have more footage?" Within minutes, another email came through with a link to a longer clip. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show the man arriving around midnight. He didn't knock or try to enter. He just stood there, shifting slightly, tilting his head toward the door as if listening. At one point he raised a hand, his fingers hovering over the doorknob before pulling away. He never left. Not until 12:57 a.m., when he turned abruptly and walked down the hall, disappearing from view. A shiver ran through me. I had been asleep at that time, completely unaware that just beyond my door, someone had been standing in the hallway, unmoving for nearly an hour. The idea made my skin crawl. I quickly checked my locks, reassuring myself that they were secure, though it did little to ease my growing anxiety. That night, I double-checked every window and door before going to bed. I even dragged a chair in front of my door, an extra barrier between me and whoever had been there. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building sent my heart racing. Every shadow felt like it was shifting, hiding something unseen. The next morning, I went straight to the building manager's office. The woman at the front desk glanced up as I walked in, recognition flashing in her eyes. "You're the one from apartment 3 billion, right?" she asked, her tone cautious. I nodded, and she sighed, pushing a printed report toward me. "You weren't the only one. 3 other tenants reported seeing a man matching that description lurking near their doors." I swallowed hard, scanning the paper. The times were eerily close together. Whoever he was, he had been moving through the building, stopping at different apartments for unknown reasons. But what unsettled me most was the last report. A tenant on the 4th floor saw him standing in the stairwell at 2 a.m., staring at the security camera. That detail made my stomach turn. He had known about the cameras, and he didn't care. I spent the day glancing over my shoulder, feeling an irrational sense of paranoia creeping in. My apartment, once my safe space, now felt vulnerable, as though the walls weren't enough to keep him out. By the time I got home, the sky had darkened, and an unsettling quiet had settled over the building. As I reached my door, my breath caught. There on the floor was something that hadn't been there when I left. A single folded piece of paper. I hesitated before bending down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. Unfolding it slowly, my pulse pounded in my ears as I read the handwritten words. "I'll come back when you're awake." My throat closed, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the note. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. He had been here again, while I was gone. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door and rushed inside, locking it behind me. My first instinct was to call the police, but what could they do? There was no crime committed, just an ominous note left behind by an unknown man. I barely slept that night, every sound outside my door sending my heart into overdrive. I stayed awake, phone clutched in my hand, ready to call for help at the slightest noise. But the hours passed in suffocating silence. Morning finally came, and with it, an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I went straight to the leasing office again, this time demanding to see more security footage. The manager hesitated but eventually agreed, pulling up the latest recordings. The screen showed the hallway outside my unit from the previous night. At 2:14 a.m., a figure appeared at the end of the hall. My stomach twisted as I watched him approach my door, moving slower this time, almost deliberately. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a piece of paper, the note. I watched, frozen, as he knelt and placed it carefully on the floor. But before he stood, he did something that made my blood run cold. He reached up and pressed his palm flat against my door, holding it there for several seconds. Then, slowly, he tilted his head, listening. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Finally, he stepped back. But before he left, he turned directly toward the security camera and smiled. I pushed away from the desk, my breath coming in short gasps. The manager looked just as disturbed, clicking out of the footage, as if that would erase it from existence. We've already sent this to the authorities, she muttered, rubbing her temples. But if you want my advice, stay somewhere else for a few nights. I didn't need to be told twice. That night I packed a bag and left, crashing at a friend's place on the other side of town. But even there, sleep refused to come. The image of that smile, the way he had pressed his hand against my door, was burned into my mind. I stayed away for a week, waiting for news, but the police never found anything. No fingerprints, no leads. The man never came back. At least not that I know of. Because sometimes, late at night, I still feel that same eerie sensation of being watched. And when I check the peephole, when I stare down that empty hallway, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting. Story 11. The airport was crowded, filled with the usual murmur of travelers, rolling suitcases, and distant announcements. I had an hour before my flight and found an empty seat near my gate. As I settled in, I glanced around at the passengers around me, all lost in their own worlds. A man sat down beside me, his presence unremarkable at first until he leaned in slightly. "You're on the wrong flight," he whispered. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as if he knew something I didn't. I turned to look at him, my stomach tightening. He was middle-aged, dressed in a dark jacket, his expression unreadable. I let out a nervous chuckle, assuming it was a mistake. "I'm pretty sure this is the right gate," I said, showing him my boarding pass. His eyes flicked over it, then back to me. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "You're on the wrong flight." His tone wasn't urgent, but it sent a cold chill down my spine. Something about the way he said it unsettled me. I turned back to my phone, pretending to ignore him, but my mind raced. Was he just some eccentric traveler? A scammer trying to trick me? I glanced at the gate screen. My flight was still listed, departing on time. There was no reason to doubt it, yet I couldn't shake the unease his words had planted. Minutes passed, and I could feel his presence still beside me. I wanted to move, but that would mean letting him know he had gotten to me. The boarding call came and people started lining up. I stood quickly, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But as I stepped forward, he spoke again. "I don't get on that plane." His voice was quieter this time, almost pleading. I turned back, expecting him to say more, to explain, but he just watched me. His eyes were dark, serious. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep walking. I handed my ticket to the attendant, my palms sweating. As I boarded, I resisted the urge to turn around to see if he was still watching. The plane was already filling up, and I found my seat near the middle. I exhaled, shaking my head. It was nothing, just some weirdo. The plane taxied to the runway, and I tried to relax. The engines hummed, the overhead lights dimmed slightly. I stared out the window as we prepared for takeoff, but my mind kept replaying his words. Was it a warning? A threat? A coincidence? As the plane lifted off, I let out a slow breath, trying to push the encounter from my mind. But something felt wrong. The air inside the cabin seemed heavier, the quiet murmur of passengers unusually subdued. I glanced at the flight attendants. They looked normal, moving through their routines, but my nerves wouldn't settle. Half an hour into the flight, the turbulence started. A sudden drop made a few passengers gasp. I gripped my armrest, my heartbeat quickening. It wasn't the worst turbulence I'd ever experienced, but something about it felt unnatural. The plane shook again, the seatbelt sign flashing on. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, his tone calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. I swallowed hard, my hands clammy. I told myself it was normal. Planes hit turbulence all the time. But then I saw the flight attendants exchanging glances, their movements slightly more hurried. A woman across the aisle clutched her husband's hand. The turbulence worsened. The plane lurched violently, overhead bins rattling. A drink cart tipped, sending plastic cups rolling down the aisle. Someone screamed. My breath came fast, my mind spinning, and then the lights flickered. A jolt sent my stomach dropping as the plane suddenly lost altitude. People shouted. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, and panic erupted. My mind flashed back to the man at the airport, his words echoing in my ears. You're on the wrong flight. I gripped my seat, heart hammering as the plane shook. The sound of the engines changed wrong, strained. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, trying to calm people, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. The plane dropped again, and I felt weightless for a split second before slamming back into my seat. Someone was crying. Someone was praying. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull the mask over my face. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the turbulence eased. The plane steadied, the lights flickered back on. The oxygen masks swayed gently from their cords. A tense silence filled the cabin. People sat frozen, gripping their seats, breathing heavily. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice returned, still controlled but noticeably tense. We've encountered severe turbulence, but we have regained stability. We are making an emergency landing at the nearest airport as a precaution. Please remain seated. My body felt drained, like all the energy had been sucked from me. I turned and looked around. Some people were still crying, others clutching their loved ones. The fear was palpable. I stared out the window, the ground below coming into view as we descended. When the plane finally landed, a wave of relief washed over the passengers. People clapped, cried, held onto each other. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my hands still trembling. The moment we were allowed to disembark, I grabbed my bag and rushed out. Inside the airport, my legs felt unsteady as I walked. My mind was spinning, still reeling from what had happened. As I made my way to a seating area, I pulled out my phone to check the news, to see if there had been reports about the incident. That's when I saw the notification. A news alert about my original flight, the one I was supposed to be on. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words. Flight 217 disappeared from radar 20 minutes after takeoff. Search and rescue efforts were underway. I stared at the screen, my entire body numb. My original flight. The one I had changed at the last second after the stranger's warning. The flight I was never supposed to be on. I turned slowly, scanning the airport, searching for him. The man who had whispered those chilling words. But he wasn't there. He was gone. As if he had never existed at all. Story 12. I set my car keys on the kitchen table like I always did. It was a habit: walk in, drop them there, and move on with my evening. But when I went to grab them a few minutes later, they were gone. At first, I thought I had simply misplaced them, but the longer I searched, the more unsettled I became. I checked the table again, running my hand across its smooth surface. Nothing. I checked the floor, thinking they might have fallen. Still nothing. My frustration grew as I expanded my search to the counters, the living room, even my bedroom, though I knew I hadn't taken them there. By the time an hour passed, I was convinced I was losing my mind. I retraced my steps again and again, trying to recall every movement since I had entered the house. It didn't make sense. They had been right there. Things didn't just vanish into thin air. I sighed, rubbing my temples, and decided to take a break. Maybe stepping away for a bit would help me think. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and as I shut the door, something metallic caught my eye. My heart nearly stopped. My keys were sitting on the top shelf, nestled between a carton of eggs and a block of cheese. I stood there, cold air spilling out onto my skin, staring at them in disbelief. I hadn't put them there. I would have remembered doing something so ridiculous. My hands trembled as I reached in and grabbed them. The metal was chilled, the key fob slightly damp from condensation. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had been distracted, absent-mindedly set them down while grabbing something. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, it didn't feel right. The unease settled deep in my stomach, an itch at the back of my mind I couldn't scratch. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept thinking about the keys, about how impossible it was for them to end up in the fridge. I double-checked all the locks before going to bed, my nerves on edge. As I lay in the dark, the silence of my house felt heavier than usual. The next morning, I told myself to forget about it. Things like that happened all the time, right? People misplaced things. They got distracted. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what had happened. And when it happened again, I knew for sure something was wrong. This time it was my phone. I had left it charging on my nightstand before bed. When I woke up, it was missing. I tore my room apart, flipping blankets, checking under the bed, even searching the bathroom in case I had absent-mindedly taken it with me in the night. Nothing. Hours later, I found it. It was in the kitchen cabinet, sitting next to the coffee mugs. A chill ran down my spine as I picked it up. The screen was cold, the battery drained even though I knew I had left it charging. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. Someone was messing with me. I checked the locks again, tested the windows. Everything was secure. There was no sign of a break-in, nothing missing except for the things that kept moving. I even considered setting up cameras, but the thought of actually capturing something made my skin crawl. Days passed, and it kept happening. Small things at first: a pen disappearing from my desk, a book shifting from one shelf to another. But then it escalated. One night I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. My room was pitch black, but I could feel someone standing there. I reached for my lamp, fumbling to turn it on. The moment light flooded the room, my door was completely shut. My hands trembled as I got up and checked the hallway. Empty. I told myself it was just a dream, that I had imagined it, but I knew better. The next morning, my wallet was missing. I found it under the bathroom sink. I started losing sleep, anxiety twisting inside me like a knot that wouldn't loosen. Every time I left something in one place, I had to take a picture to remind myself where it was. But even that didn't stop it. The objects kept moving, even when I had proof of where they had been. One night, I placed my keys on the table and took a picture. I stared at the image, memorizing every detail, then went to take a shower. When I came back, the keys were gone. I checked my phone, my hands shaking as I opened the picture. The keys were missing from the table in the photo too. I dropped my phone, a cold wave of fear washing over me. It wasn't just that things were moving. It was as if reality itself was changing around me. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with Sarah for a few days, desperate to escape whatever was happening. The first night at her place, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Nothing moved. Nothing disappeared. I started to think maybe it was all in my head. But when I returned home, my stomach dropped. My front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. I stepped inside cautiously, my eyes scanning every inch of the living room. Everything looked the same except for one thing. On the kitchen table, right where my keys should have been that first night, sat a single note. My breath caught in my throat as I picked it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message simple. Found you again. Story 13. The rental car smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener. I adjusted the seat, buckled in, and started the engine. The GPS screen flickered to life, showing a previous destination still saved under home. I frowned, tapping the screen to clear it, but curiosity got the better of me. The address wasn't one I recognized. It was a town about 40 miles away, not exactly close but not too far either. I wondered if the last person had forgotten to erase their information. Still, something about it felt off. I tried to ignore it as I pulled onto the highway, heading toward my hotel. The drive was uneventful, just long stretches of road cutting through empty fields. But my eyes kept drifting to the GPS, the address sitting there like an invitation. By the time I reached the hotel, I had almost convinced myself to forget about it. I parked, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. But as I lay in bed that night, the thought lingered, why had the last driver marked that place as home? The next morning, I had a few hours to kill before my meeting. Without really thinking, I got back in the car and pulled up the address again. A quick search showed it was in a rural area with no clear landmarks, just a house in the middle of nowhere. I drove without really deciding to. The road stretched on, winding through sparse trees and abandoned farmhouses. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. I told myself I was just being ridiculous, that I would drive past and go back. The GPS led me down a narrow gravel road flanked by tall, overgrown grass. My fingers tightened around the wheel as the house came into view. It was old, the paint peeling, the windows dark. A single car sat in the driveway covered in dust. I hesitated at the end of the drive, my heart beating faster than it should have. Someone had lived here recently enough to mark it in the GPS. But the place looked abandoned. I debated turning around, but something caught my eye. The front door was slightly open. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I wasn't supposed to be here. I could still leave, drive away, and pretend I had never come. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The air was thick and still, as if the whole area was holding its breath. I took a few cautious steps toward the house, my eyes scanning the windows for any sign of movement. The door creaked as I pushed it open further. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. Furniture remained, but everything was covered in a layer of grime. It was as if the house had been abandoned in a hurry. A single plate sat on the kitchen table, dried food still stuck to it. Nearby, a coffee cup had tipped over, its contents long since evaporated. My stomach churned. Someone had lived here. Someone had left suddenly. I turned back toward the door, ready to leave. Then I saw keys on the counter, a set identical to the ones in my pocket. My throat went dry as I stepped closer. The keychain had the same logo as the rental company. My pulse thundered in my ears. The last person who rented my car had been here, and they had never come back. A noise came from upstairs. A soft creak, like weight shifting on old floorboards. My entire body went rigid. I wasn't alone. For a long moment I stood frozen, barely breathing. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps moved toward the stairs. I turned and bolted, sprinting for the car. My fingers fumbled with the handle before I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life as I slammed the car into reverse, kicking up gravel as I sped back down the road. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who or what had been in that house. Back at the hotel, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to slow my breathing. The keys, the house, the address, it all felt like a warning. Someone had been there before me and something had happened to them. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That I had followed a random address from a GPS and found an abandoned house. That I had heard footsteps. It wasn't enough. The next morning I returned the car early. The clerk barely glanced at me as I handed over the keys. "Everything all right with the vehicle?" she asked. I hesitated. "Who rented this before me?" She frowned. "I can't give out that information." "What if I told you they never came back?" I asked. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. She turned to her computer, typing something in. "This car was last rented out 3 weeks ago," she said. "The customer never returned it. We had to report it stolen." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Did they ever find the person? She shook her head. "No, just the car, abandoned in a parking lot." I forced myself to nod, thanked her, and left. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel of my own car. The last person to use that rental had disappeared, and their last stop had been that house. As I pulled onto the highway, I told myself I was done thinking about it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been followed up those stairs, and whoever or whatever had been in that house knew I had been there. That night, in the silence of my apartment, I heard footsteps outside my door. Story 14. My mom and I were sitting in the living room when she pulled out an old photo album. The worn leather cover creaked as she flipped through the pages, pausing every now and then to smile at a memory. I leaned closer, watching her fingers trace over faded photographs of birthdays, vacations, and holidays. Then she turned to a page I hadn't seen before. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a picture. "Your first birthday." I glanced at the photo, expecting to see a familiar image of myself as a baby. But the child in the picture wasn't me. The baby had dark eyes around her face and hair that was slightly curlier than mine had ever been. I frowned, my stomach twisting with unease. "Mom," I said slowly, "that's not me." She laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Of course it is. You were so chubby back then." She tilted her head, studying the picture as if to convince herself. "You've just changed a lot." But I knew it wasn't me. I'd seen my baby pictures plenty of times before, framed in our house, saved in my phone, scattered throughout old albums. My features had always been distinct, with lighter eyes and a narrower face. I felt a creeping discomfort settle over me. "Where did this picture come from?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom hesitated, her expression shifting slightly. "It's been in this album for years," she said. "Your dad and I put all your baby photos in here." I swallowed, staring at the unfamiliar baby in the picture. "Can I see the others?" She flipped through the album, showing me more pictures of my supposed early years. Most of them were ones I recognized: me as a toddler, me at preschool, me on family vacations. But here and there, tucked between familiar memories, were more pictures of the other baby. The feeling of unease deepened. "Mom, are you sure this is me?" She sighed, shutting the album. "I wouldn't put a stranger's baby in our family album, would I?" She smiled, but there was something forced about it. "You're overthinking it." I nodded slowly, though my mind was spinning. That baby wasn't me. I was sure of it. But if it wasn't me, then who was it? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo. The way my mom brushed it off felt wrong, like she knew something she wasn't telling me. I grabbed my phone and pulled up my baby pictures, comparing them to the one in the album. The differences were obvious. The baby in the album was not the same person. The next day, while my mom was out, I went back to the album. I turned the pages carefully, searching for any details I might have missed. On the back of the first picture, faintly written in pencil, was a date: June 12, 1996. My stomach dropped. I was born in August of 1996. A cold shiver ran down my spine. If the baby in the photo was from June, then it couldn't have been me. My fingers trembled as I flipped through more pictures. On the back of a few others, I found similar dates months before I was even born. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe my parents had taken care of another baby before me, a relative's child, or a friend's. But if that were the case, why would my mom insist it was me? I decided to ask my dad. That evening, I waited until we were alone and brought up the photo. "Hey Dad," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Do you remember my first birthday picture?" He looked up from his newspaper, nodding. "Of course. Your mom took so many pictures that day." "Was I a chubby baby?" I asked, watching his reaction closely. He chuckled. "Not really. You were always pretty small." My stomach tightened. "Can you take a look at something for me?" I grabbed the album and flipped to the picture, pointing at the baby. "Is this me?" Dad's face changed instantly. The color drained from his cheeks and his mouth opened slightly before snapping shut. He looked at the photo for a long moment, his hands gripping the edge of the album. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "In the album," I said. "Mom said it's me, but I don't think it is." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "She showed you this." I nodded slowly. "Who is it?" For a long time he didn't answer. Then, finally, he sighed. "I think it's time we told you the truth." My heart pounded as he gestured for me to sit down. "Before you were born," he said, "your mom and I had another child, a baby boy." My breath caught in my throat. "What?" He didn't make it past 6 months. Dad's voice wavered slightly. "It was a hard time for us. We never talked about it after you were born. Your mom, she never let go of him." My mind reeled. I had a brother, one I had never known about. Dad shook his head. "We weren't trying to hide it from you. But after you came along, your mom started telling herself that the memories belonged to you, not him. It was her way of coping. A heavy silence filled the room. I stared at the picture, the baby's dark eyes now seeming even more haunting. My mom had convinced herself that I was him, that those were my memories, not his. When my mom came home, I didn't say anything. I just hugged her. She held on a little longer than usual, as if she knew I had figured it out. That night, I put the album back where I found it. I didn't need to look at the pictures again. I would always know the truth now. And somehow I felt like I had finally met the brother I never knew. Story 15. I walked into my bathroom, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The morning routine was automatic: turn on the sink, grab my toothbrush, and start brushing. But as soon as my hand wrapped around the handle, I paused. The toothbrush was wet. Confusion flickered through me as I stared at it. I hadn't used it yet today, and I always let it dry after use. My fingers ran along the damp bristles, cold and unmistakably used. My first thought was that maybe I had forgotten using it, but that didn't make sense. I lived alone. No one else had access to my apartment, and I was certain I hadn't brushed my teeth yet. I set it down carefully, my mind racing. Had someone been in my home? The idea unsettled me. I scanned the bathroom, looking for anything else out of place. The hand towel was still neatly folded, the soap bottle untouched. Everything looked normal, except for the toothbrush. I stepped out of the bathroom, checking the locks on my front door. The deadbolt was still in place, and the chain was latched. My windows were locked as well. Nothing suggested that anyone had been inside. Forcing myself to stay calm, I threw the toothbrush away and grabbed a new one from the cabinet. Maybe it was just a strange mistake, something I had done absent-mindedly. But even as I brushed my teeth, a heavy feeling settled in my chest. That night, as I got ready for bed, I hesitated before stepping into the bathroom. The new toothbrush sat in its holder, exactly where I had left it. I exhaled, feeling a little ridiculous. It had probably just been my imagination. The next morning, I reached for my toothbrush and froze. The bristles were wet again. A sharp chill ran through me, and I yanked my hand back. I had just opened a fresh one yesterday. There was no reason for it to be damp. My pulse pounded in my ears as I took a step back. I checked the front door again, my heart racing. Still locked. The windows were shut. I even checked my closet, though I wasn't sure what I expected to find. I barely slept that night. Every noise in the apartment made me sit up, listening intently. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation, but I couldn't come up with one. I was alone, and yet something in my home was being disturbed. The following morning, I was almost afraid to check. My hand shook as I reached for my toothbrush. The bristles were soaked. A cold, sinking feeling spread through me as I stared at it. Someone or something was using it. I threw it away again, this time digging through the trash to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Both the old and the new toothbrush were there. I wasn't imagining it. I set up a small camera in my bathroom, placing it discreetly near the sink. If someone was coming into my apartment, I was going to catch them. That night, I double-checked every lock before climbing into bed, the camera running. Morning came, and I rushed to check the footage. My stomach twisted as I watched the screen. For most of the night, the bathroom remained still, the only movement being the occasional flicker of the nightlight. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the footage glitched. The screen went black for 3 seconds before flickering back on. The toothbrush was in the same place, but something was different. The bristles were wet. I rewound the footage, staring at the screen. Nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone entering. Just the brief moment of static, and then the toothbrush was wet. Panic settled deep in my gut. I didn't know what was worse, the idea that someone had broken in or the fact that no one had. I backed away from my laptop, my breath unsteady. I decided to stay somewhere else for a few nights. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, brushing off their questions with a vague excuse about needing a change of scenery. But even in a different place, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After 3 days, I returned home, forcing myself to believe it had been a mistake. Maybe the footage had glitched, maybe I had somehow overlooked something. I needed to move on. That night, I placed a brand new toothbrush in the holder and sat awake in bed, waiting. Hours passed and nothing happened. The apartment was silent, no disturbances, no strange sounds. Maybe it was over. Just as I was about to fall asleep, a sound echoed from the bathroom. A slow, deliberate tap against the sink. My entire body tensed. I couldn't move at first. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Then, gathering every ounce of courage, I stepped out of bed. My feet were silent against the floor as I crept toward the bathroom, my breath shallow. The light flickered as I reached the door. My hand trembled as I flipped the switch. The toothbrush sat where I had left it, but the bristles were dripping wet. A breathy whisper brushed against my ear. My vision blurred with terror as I spun around. The room was empty. My own ragged breathing was the only sound. I grabbed my things and left without looking back. I didn't care what explanation existed, I wasn't staying there another night. The apartment was someone else's problem now. Story 16. I had just finished cleaning up after a long day at work, and the house was eerily quiet. My parents were out for the weekend, and I enjoyed the solitude, the way the house seemed to wrap itself in peace when I was alone. The silence, though, was always a bit unsettling at times, but I didn't mind it. At least I thought I didn't. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the direction of the vent near the ceiling. "I can hear you too." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine, and for a moment I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or the wind outside pushing through the vents, but the voice had sounded too clear, too deliberate. I got up slowly, walking over to the vent, my feet moving like they were submerged in water. I pressed my ear to it, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the air conditioning kicking on. "Hello?" I called out, half expecting no answer. There was nothing but silence. A small part of me told me it was nothing, that I should go back to the couch, but another part of me, the part one didn't want to listen to, urged me to stay. The voice had been real. I wasn't imagining it. I walked over to the kitchen, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe I had heard it wrong. Maybe it had been my own voice in my head, some leftover echo from a busy day. But then, as I was pouring myself a glass of water, I heard it again, louder this time. "I can hear you too." The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my eyes wide and searching the room for any sign of movement. The house was still, but the whisper, it was real. I stood there, staring at the broken glass, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? I hadn't even heard anyone come in. I hadn't even heard a car. Could it be someone hiding in the house? But I hadn't heard any footsteps. I hadn't seen any doors open or closed. I cautiously backed away from the kitchen, my heart thudding in my chest. I moved toward the stairs, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My feet felt heavy, like I was walking through a fog, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked up, half expecting to see someone standing there. There was nothing. I made my way back into the living room and stood in front of the vent again, staring up at the small metal grill. It had to be the wind. It was just the wind, right? But the voice came again, this time more insistent, as if it was coming from directly above me. "I can hear you too. Don't run." My pulse spiked. The voice was too close, too personal. It felt as though it was inside my head, inside the very walls of the house. My stomach twisted, and I took a step back. The whisper was growing more urgent, more alive, each time it spoke. I tried to reach for my phone, but my hands were shaking too violently. I finally grabbed it and dialed my parents. My mom picked up on the third ring. "Hello?" "Mom, something's wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "There's someone in the house. I heard them. They're in the vents." I could hear her shift on the other end. "What do you mean, sweetie? Are you sure you're just not hearing things? The house can be pretty quiet when you're alone." "I'm not hearing things," I snapped, almost hysterical. "I heard them whispering. They're in the vents, and they know I'm here." She sighed, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "Sweetheart, maybe you're just tired. Why don't you sit down for a bit and relax? You're imagining it." But I couldn't relax. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was in the walls, waiting for me. "Please," I whispered, "just come home. I'm scared." She didn't respond right away, but I could hear her breathing on the other end. Okay, we'll come home as soon as we can. Just stay where you are. We're on our way." I hung up and stared at the vent. My breath was shallow, my eyes darting around the room. The silence stretched out, heavy and unbearable, as I waited for something to happen. I couldn't keep standing there, not knowing what was going on. But I couldn't leave the house either. I felt trapped, like I was being pulled in two directions. The voice whispered again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. "I'm closer now." I turned, my body tense, but there was no one in the room with me. My heart hammered in my chest, and I was sure I was going to pass out. The whispering continued, low and almost comforting, but all I could feel was terror. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here alone. Just as I moved toward the door, the vent creaked, the metal shifting under an unseen pressure. The whisper came again, louder, as if it were right behind me. "Don't go." I froze, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. The walls felt too close. I turned to the vent one last time, my breath coming in short gasps. The whisper stopped. A long, empty silence followed. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. Then, as I stepped toward the door again, the whisper returned, faint but clear. "I'm waiting." Story 17. I was sitting at my desk, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my emails when I got a notification from my local library. It was a simple message, just a friendly reminder that I had an overdue book. At first, I thought nothing of it. I had a few library books on hand, nothing too strange about it. But when I clicked open the email to see which book, I froze. The title was unfamiliar. I had never borrowed it. The book was titled Whispers in the Dark. I didn't recognize the title, let alone remember checking it out. My pulse quickened as I scanned the details. It had been checked out under my name just 2 weeks ago. I quickly ran through the list of books I had borrowed recently, but none of them matched the one in the email. I had no memory of ever even seeing that book. I opened the library's website and checked my account. Sure enough, the book was listed under my current checkouts. I had no idea how it had gotten there. I didn't visit the library more than once a month, and I never borrowed books on impulse. This wasn't like me. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Maybe there had been some mistake, a mix-up at the desk when I checked out the other books. But the email said it was checked out in my name. My library card number was attached to it. I immediately called the library, hoping for some explanation. The librarian who answered was friendly, but her voice sounded tired. I explained the situation, asking if there was a mistake. She paused for a moment before confirming that the book was indeed checked out under my name, with no discrepancies in their records. It was returned late, she said, but that's all we have in the system. It's showing that you still have it. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I didn't borrow that book, I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. Can you check if anyone else has had it before me? The librarian put me on hold for a few moments. When she returned, she gave me the same answer. It looks like it's only been checked out by you. I thanked her, though I felt far from relieved. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, staring at the screen. The longer I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. If I hadn't checked out the book, then how had it ended up in my account? Had someone used my library card without me knowing? But I hadn't lost it, and I hadn't lent it out to anyone. I spent the next few hours pacing around my apartment, wondering what to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The book's title kept echoing in my mind, Whispers in the Dark. It felt oddly familiar, like something I had heard of but never paid attention to. That night, I decided to go to the library and investigate further. It was late, and the building was nearly empty. I headed straight to the section where I knew the book should be. The shelves were organized and quiet, but when I found the spot where the book should have been, I noticed something odd. The shelf was empty. I felt a tightness in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why would the book be checked out to me, yet not be in the library system? I was beginning to wonder if this was all a strange coincidence or if someone was playing a prank. I pulled out my phone to check my account once more, but then something caught my eye. The name of the author of Whispers in the Dark was etched into the spine of a book sitting alone on a nearby table. I froze. The book looked old, its cover worn and faded, like it had been handled for decades. I couldn't remember ever seeing it before, but there was something about it that made my stomach tighten. Without thinking, I reached for it. As soon as my fingers touched the cover, a strange sensation swept over me, an unsettling chill, like I was being watched. I felt an undeniable urge to open it. I sat down at the table and flipped the cover open. The pages were yellowed with age, the paper brittle. It wasn't a regular library book at all. The text was handwritten, not printed. My eyes scanned the first few lines, and I felt my pulse quicken. The handwriting was erratic, slanted, as if the person who wrote it was in a hurry or desperate. The words seemed to blur together at first, but then they became clearer. You must return it. Don't read it, or the whispers will begin. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I slammed the book shut, standing up quickly. My heart raced, and my hands trembled as I placed the book back on the table. I didn't know what to make of it, but I couldn't stay there any longer. My mind was reeling, and I needed to get out of that place. I rushed back to the front desk and asked the librarian if she knew anything about the book one had just found. She glanced at the title, her face pale. "You shouldn't be looking at that. she said in a low voice. "That book, it's not part of our collection. It hasn't been checked out in years." I was about to ask what she meant when the lights in the library flickered. My breath caught in my throat as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The librarian's expression hardened. "You should go," she whispered. "Now." I didn't argue. I turned and left the library, my feet moving faster than I realized. Once outside, I checked my phone again. There was a new notification from the library, another overdue reminder for whispers in the dark. But now it was marked as returned. I never returned to the library after that night. I didn't want to know what was really happening with that book, or how it had ended up in my account. I tried to forget it, to move on with my life. But every once in a while, when the house is silent and the lights flicker, I hear a faint whisper just at the edge of my hearing. And I wonder for a moment if I made the right choice in leaving that book behind. Story 18. It was a cool, quiet morning when I stepped out of my apartment, the streets still damp from the night's rain. I had just finished my cup of coffee and was walking to the corner store to grab a few things for breakfast. The neighborhood was still sleepy, the early light spilling over the trees and the quiet pavement. As I walked down the sidewalk, I noticed a man on a bike coming towards me. He was dressed in a plain black jacket and jeans, his helmet tucked under one arm. He looked ordinary enough, nothing that stood out about him at first. As he got closer, he nodded at me, just a brief acknowledgement, a simple gesture that seemed normal, like any passing stranger would do. I nodded back, keeping my pace steady as I continued walking. It was a momentary exchange, nothing more, but as he pedaled past me, something felt slightly off. The way he looked at me seemed almost knowing. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had seen him before. It wasn't a face that was familiar, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. I shook it off, chalking it up to the early morning grogginess. I turned the corner, heading towards the street that led to the store. The man on the bike was still in my peripheral vision as I walked, but just as I reached the corner and took the turn, I glanced back down the street. He was gone. I stopped mid-step, my heart skipping a beat. The street was empty. No sign of the man. No bike, no wheels spinning along the wet pavement, not even a shadow in the distance. He had been only a few yards behind me when I turned the corner just seconds before. There was no way he could have disappeared so quickly. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had taken a different route. A side street, perhaps. I scanned the area, looking up and down the sidewalk, but there was nothing. No sign of him anywhere. My eyes drifted back to the corner where I had turned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was no sound of tires on wet pavement, no distant hum of a bike's gears, just silence. I hesitated, unsure whether to continue on my way or turn back. But I had already made the decision to go to the store, so I pushed it from my mind and continued walking. The uneasy feeling lingered, though, trailing me as I moved through the quiet neighborhood. When I reached the store, the same sense of discomfort hung over me. I grabbed a few items, eggs, bread, some fruit, and stood in line, absent-mindedly staring at the cashier as she rang up my purchase. My mind kept drifting back to that man, to the strange way he had disappeared. It didn't make sense. I thought about asking someone in the store if they had seen him, but I quickly dismissed the idea. They would think I was crazy, paranoid. It was just a guy on a bike, I told myself. It was nothing. But that nagging feeling didn't go away. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the image of the man on the bike, his face too familiar. his disappearance too quick, too complete. I retraced my steps, walking the same path I had just taken. I turned the same corner, looking for any sign of the biker. But nothing. The street was empty, silent. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had just been too tired or distracted. Maybe I had mistaken a different person for him. But deep down I knew I hadn't. That night, as I sat in my apartment, trying to focus on work, I heard the sound of tires on the wet pavement outside. I froze. It was faint at first, but unmistakable, the soft, rhythmic whir of bike wheels turning. I glanced out the window, my heart skipping in my chest. There, in the distance, I saw him. The same man on the bike. He was pedaling slowly down the street, as if he were waiting for me. My breath caught in my throat, my hands suddenly clammy. How was he here? How could he be here now? I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. I watched through the blinds as he passed, his face obscured by the low light. There was no acknowledgement this time, no nod or glance. He didn't even seem to notice me. He just kept riding, slowly disappearing down the street. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I decided to take a different route to the store. Maybe I was overthinking things, letting my mind run wild with strange theories. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something was following me. I walked through a different part of the neighborhood, avoiding the corner where I had first seen the biker. As I turned another street, I glanced behind me, half expecting to see him again. But there was nothing. I finally started to relax, thinking it had all been in my head, until I reached the store. There he was. The same man on the bike, standing across the street, just watching me. This time I couldn't look away. His gaze was locked on me, not the kind of look that was casual or even curious. No, this was something else, something that felt much darker. I turned quickly, ducking into the store, my heart pounding. I stayed there for a while, waiting until I was sure he was gone. But when I stepped back outside, I found the street empty. Again. And that was the last time I saw him. The last time I ever saw the man on the bike. But even now, every time I turn a corner or see a lone figure riding in the distance, I wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting. Story 19. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not a delivery, so I glanced out the peephole with curiosity. A man in a faded blue uniform stood on the other side, holding a package in his hands. His face was expressionless, but his eyes had a strange intensity to them, like he was waiting for something, waiting for me to open the door. "Package for you," he said, his voice low. "Sign here." He held out a small clipboard with a pen attached to it. I frowned, unsure. I hadn't ordered anything. No new gadgets, no online shopping sprees. I couldn't even remember the last time I made an online purchase. "Sorry, I think you've got the wrong house," I said, shaking my head. I didn't order anything. The delivery driver didn't seem fazed. "It's for you." "All right," he said again, his voice almost too calm. His hand remained outstretched with the clipboard. Something about him felt off. He wasn't insisting, but there was a strange insistence in his silence. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. The idea of refusing the package felt awkward, but accepting it made me uneasy. I wasn't a paranoid person, but something about this interaction didn't sit right with me. I glanced down at the package, which was wrapped in plain brown paper, no labels, no address. Just my name scrawled across it in black ink. "Hey, can I just see the tracking number or something?" I asked, half trying to confirm that this wasn't some kind of mistake. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced down at the package in his hands, then back at me. His eyes locked onto mine, too steady, too unblinking. "There's no need," he said, his tone almost soothing, but also a little too forced. "Just sign here, and I'll be on my way." I hesitated. There was no legitimate reason not to take it, but a gut feeling told me something was wrong. I didn't know this man, and I didn't know where this package came from. Maybe it was an honest mistake, or maybe it was something more. I stood frozen at the door, the silence hanging between us. "Look, I'm really not expecting anything," I said, trying again. "Are you sure you have the right address?" The driver's face twitched slightly, but he didn't respond. He just held the clipboard out a little further, pressing it against the door as if to push me into taking it. Something shifted in the air, a slight change in the atmosphere. I could feel it, a tightness, a tension I hadn't noticed before. "It's for you," he repeated, his voice carrying a subtle warning. "I'm not supposed to leave it without a signature." I glanced at the package again, then back at the man. "I don't want it," I said firmly, stepping back from the door. There was a long, drawn-out silence. The driver didn't move, didn't say a word. For a moment I thought he might just leave, but instead he stood still, as if expecting something else. And then, in a sudden motion, he turned and walked away, without saying another word. I watched through the peephole as he made his way back to the van parked in front of my house, his movements stiff and deliberate. He didn't look back once. The door clicked shut, and I stood there, feeling both relieved and confused. What had just happened? Was that a normal delivery? Who would send me something without my knowledge? And why had that man been so insistent? I looked out the window, watching the van drive away. It wasn't like any delivery vehicle I recognized. It was a dull white, with no logo or markings of any kind. Just a plain van that seemed to blend into the street, like it was trying to be invisible. As I turned away, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. Something about the interaction didn't sit right, and I couldn't let it go. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It was just a package. Nothing to worry about, right? I decided to check the package anyway. Maybe it was something I had forgotten about, some small order I made weeks ago, and then just forgotten. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and carefully sliced open the brown paper. Inside was another box, this one wrapped in layers of tape, sealed tight, as if to make sure it was secure. My fingers trembled as I pried open the edges, the tape pulling away with a faint ripping sound. The box was small, about the size of a shoebox, and it felt heavier than it should have been. When I finally opened it, my breath caught in my throat. There was no note, no invoice, just a single black velvet pouch. I lifted the pouch carefully, feeling the weight inside. Slowly, I untied the string, revealing a strange object nestled within. A knife. It was the same size as the one I used every day, but the design was unlike any knife I had ever seen. The handle was smooth, polished wood, etched with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. The blade itself was sharp and gleaming, but its dark sheen had an almost unnatural quality to it, like it was too perfect, too sleek. I set it down on the table, a chill running up my spine. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an order I had forgotten. This knife, it wasn't just a knife. It felt wrong, as if it belonged to someone else. I tried to tell myself that it was a prank, that maybe someone was playing some elaborate joke on me. But nothing about this felt like a joke. The driver's strange insistence, the oddness of the package, and the eerie precision with which everything had unfolded, it didn't add up. I couldn't keep it. I didn't even want to touch it anymore, but I couldn't throw it away either. So, I wrapped it back in the velvet pouch, tied it up tight, and shoved it in the back of a drawer, hoping to forget about it. But I didn't. The feeling lingered. Days passed and I tried to go about my life. But every time I opened that drawer, I couldn't shake the thought, who had sent it? And why did I feel like I was being watched? Story 20. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to getting home. The evening air was cool as I made my way to the parking lot, the familiar hum of the city in the background. My car was parked in the same spot it had been in for weeks, and I felt a wave of relief at the thought of finally sitting down and heading home. When I reached my car, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, more than it should have been. I paused for a moment, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I always double-checked my car before leaving anywhere, and I was certain I had locked it earlier. With a slight hesitation, I slid into the driver's seat, and that's when I noticed that the seat was moved back, farther than I would ever leave it. My mind raced. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had been distracted and accidentally left the seat like that when I parked. But deep down, I knew something was off. The feeling in my gut intensified as I looked around the car, searching for any other signs that someone had been inside. The floor was clear, but there was a faint scent I couldn't place, something vaguely unfamiliar. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then I hesitated. There was no clear sign of a break-in. The glove compartment was locked. My bag was still in the passenger seat. Nothing appeared disturbed. The only thing that stood out was the seat, how it was pushed back just enough to be noticeable. My heart thudded in my chest as I checked the back seat just to be sure. Empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The unsettling sensation lingered as I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I adjusted the seat back to where it normally was, but the discomfort remained. Something about the car felt different. It felt invaded. I glanced around the parking lot again, hoping to catch sight of someone who might have been near my car. But the lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered in the dim light of the street lamps. The quiet night stretched on, and I realized how ridiculous I was being. There was no reason to panic. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, trying to push the nagging feeling out of my mind. As I drove, I tried to focus on the road, but the seat kept bothering me. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and every slight shift or sound seemed amplified. I had locked my car. I had checked it, so why did it feel like someone else had been in it? The drive home seemed longer than usual, as if time itself was stretching out just to make me feel more uncomfortable. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the back seat. But the mirror was empty, just the darkened street behind me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I parked the car and sat there for a moment. I couldn't explain why, but I felt trapped inside my own vehicle. I wanted to get out, but the thought of leaving the door unlocked again felt like an invitation to something I couldn't see. I took a deep breath and exited the car, locking it behind me. The familiar weight of the key in my pocket gave me a small sense of security, but that sense quickly vanished when I saw it. On the driver's side window, faint but visible in the moonlight, was a fingerprint. A clear, single print that hadn't been there before. My blood ran cold as I stared at it. It wasn't just any print, it was smudged, like someone had placed their finger on the glass and then slowly dragged it down, as if they were looking inside. I immediately fumbled for my phone again, my mind racing. I pulled up the camera, snapping a photo of the fingerprint, my hands shaking. What did it mean? How had someone gotten into my car? The doors had been locked. I had checked. I thought about calling the police but felt foolish. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, no real evidence of a crime. It could have been an accident. But then I thought about the seat that had been moved back. That wasn't something I would do on accident. It was too deliberate, too unsettling. I spent the next few hours trying to calm myself down, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I couldn't stop thinking about the fingerprint, about the seat, about the strange scent I had noticed earlier. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. Who would go into my car, move the seat, leave a fingerprint, and then vanish without taking anything? Finally, I decided to check the security cameras around my house. I had a system set up for when I was away, but I'd never thought to check it for incidents like this. I replayed the footage from earlier that evening. At first, the video showed nothing unusual, just the usual movement in the parking lot. A few cars passing by, the shadows stretching as the night wore on. But then around 7:30 p.m., just as I was finishing my shift, I saw it. A figure approached my car. They walked casually, stopping at my vehicle. For a moment, they just stood there, as if deciding what to do. Then, they slowly opened the driver's side door. I froze, my hand still hovering over the phone. The figure wasn't in any hurry. They didn't seem rushed. They casually sat in the car, adjusting the seat just as I had found it. The person stayed inside for several minutes before getting out and walking away without any hurry. They didn't look back. I felt sick. This person knew exactly what they were doing. They had been in my car, and now they were watching me. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. The officer who responded was kind but matter-of-fact. "We'll take a look at the footage, but it sounds like a case of someone looking for something they couldn't find. But don't worry," he added, "we'll patrol your area." That didn't make me feel better. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I kept checking my car, checking the locks, checking the windows, feeling like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Whoever had been in my car, they hadn't stolen anything, but they had taken something far worse, my sense of security. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting for the next chance to slip inside again. Story 21. It was a crisp, quiet afternoon when I decided to go for a walk in the nearby park. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty paths. Most people were probably indoors, enjoying the warmth of their homes, but I needed to stretch my legs. As I walked, I passed the playground. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, and the seesaw creaked in a rhythm that seemed to echo the silence. At first, I didn't notice him. I was too busy admiring the soft golden hue of the evening sun and lost in my own thoughts. But when I glanced to my left, I saw a man sitting on one of the benches, completely still. He wasn't watching the children who were playing on the other side of the playground, but me. His gaze was intense, almost piercing, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly looked away, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. There were plenty of people in parks, right? It was normal to see strangers. But this man's stare felt different, too deliberate, too focused. I kept walking, my pace quickening. I didn't dare look back. A few moments later, I reached the edge of the park, where a row of trees marked the end of the walking path. The park had always been peaceful, but today it felt off. I glanced back, half expecting him to still be there, but I couldn't see him. Maybe I had just imagined it. After all, it was a busy area. People sat on benches all the time. I took a deep breath and tried to relax, continuing my walk through the quieter part of the park. But every few steps, my mind kept drifting back to the man. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me more than the kids. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Deciding to cut my walk short, I turned around and headed back the way I came. I didn't want to walk near the playground again, but I found myself subconsciously heading that way. As I approached, I saw that the man was still there. He hadn't moved, but his eyes were locked on me, unblinking. I felt my heart begin to race. It wasn't just that he was watching, it was how he was watching. His gaze was fixed, almost calculating. I couldn't see his expression clearly, but his posture was rigid, like he was waiting for something. I forced myself to keep walking, my breath shallow as I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread building inside me. As I neared the playground, I glanced up at the trees lining the park's boundary. A few birds flitted by, but the usual sounds of life seemed muted, almost distant. The playground, usually a place of laughter and energy, felt eerily quiet. I quickened my pace, my footsteps growing louder on the path. That's when I heard it soft, almost imperceptible at first. A rustle behind me. I froze, my body tense. My heart pounded in my chest, and I instinctively turned my head to look over my shoulder. The man was gone. The bench where he'd been sitting was empty, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavier, charged with a quiet tension. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting. I tried to push forward, but my steps felt slower now. My feet were heavy, like I was being pulled back toward the playground, toward that bench. I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence, like a shadow lingering just out of sight. It was a sensation I couldn't shake, something watching, waiting. By now, I was nearing the playground again, and I instinctively glanced over. To my horror, I saw the man standing by the swings, just a few yards away from the children who were laughing and playing on the jungle gym. He wasn't moving, but his eyes were fixed on me again. I froze in place. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Was he following me? Why hadn't I noticed him move? And why was he acting like this, like I was the only one in the park that mattered? The air felt thin, as though it were pressing down on me. I wanted to run, to get as far away from him as possible, but my feet refused to move. Instead, I stood there, my legs trembling beneath me, my breath shallow. The man's gaze never wavered. And then, suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. A young girl, no older than 6, called out to him from the swings. "Are you going to play with us, mister?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me. His expression was unreadable, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. The girl's voice broke the tension, but the unease in my chest remained. I took a step back, unsure of what to do. I wasn't sure if I should say something, ask if everything was okay, or if I should just walk away. But before I could make a decision, the man slowly turned and walked toward the edge of the playground. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. As he moved, I saw something strange. He didn't walk like a normal person. There was an unnatural stiffness to his gait, like his legs were too rigid, too controlled. It was like he was gliding, floating almost, not touching the ground the way a human should. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to look away as he disappeared into the trees at the edge of the park. The quiet returned, but it was different this time, heavier, more unsettling. I didn't stay long after that. My mind was racing, my thoughts tangled. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, watching me like he knew something I didn't. The fear clung to me like a second skin, and as I reached the park's exit, I dared one last glance over my shoulder. The playground was empty. The swings gently swayed in the breeze, but something about the emptiness felt wrong, like the park itself was holding its breath. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, I knew that man was still watching. Story 22. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when a thought crossed my mind. I should text Rachel. It had been a while since we caught up, and I wanted to check in. I opened my messaging app and started typing, "Hey, how have you been? I feel like we haven't talked in forever." I was about to hit send when something strange happened. My phone screen flickered briefly. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, phones do weird things all the time. But as I was about to press the send button, the text box auto-filled with more words I hadn't typed. At first, it was just a few extra words, like the phone had misunderstood my intent. It added, "I know what happened last time." I paused, confused. What did that mean? I stared at the text for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't typed anything about a last time, and certainly not anything that would suggest I knew something. My mind raced, trying to recall any conversation with Rachel that might have hinted at something like that, but nothing came to mind. I was about to delete the message when my phone did it again. The text box auto-filled again, but this time the words were different. "I'm coming for you, just like last time." My hands froze over the screen, a chill crawling up my spine. I hadn't typed that. In fact, I had no idea what it meant. I quickly deleted the message, feeling uneasy. I didn't think I had anything to worry about, but the idea of some kind of glitch in my phone lingered in my mind. Maybe I was being paranoid, but the words on the screen seemed too deliberate. I decided to text Rachel anyway, ignoring the strange autofill glitch. I composed a normal message this time. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Let's catch up soon." I typed it out and hit send. The message went through, and I put the phone down on the coffee table, trying to shake off the weird feeling. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed. Rachel's reply popped up on the screen. "I'm glad you reached out. I've been thinking about you too. We need to talk about what happened." I felt a chill run through me. What happened? I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen as I tried to respond. My mind raced, trying to recall if we had ever discussed anything that would warrant such a cryptic message. We hadn't talked in months, and yet it felt like there was something in those words that carried a weight I couldn't quite place. I opened the message again, rereading it. "We need to talk about what happened." What did that even mean? The last time we'd really spoken was at her birthday party months ago, but nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Had she forgotten something? Did I? I shook my head, trying to brush off the uneasy feeling that was settling into my chest. I decided to reply, asking her what she meant. But before I could type a single letter, the text box filled itself again, this time more aggressively. "I'm right behind you. Turn around." My heart skipped a beat. I immediately looked up from my phone, scanning the room. No one was there. I stood up, my throat dry, and walked to the windows. The street outside was empty. There was nothing unusual. My reflection in the window stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale. I felt my breath quicken as I checked my phone again. The message was still there, but I hadn't typed it. I hadn't even touched the screen. A lump formed in my throat as I thought about the implications. Who was sending these messages? Was someone controlling my phone? Or was it something else? I was about to throw the phone down when a new notification appeared. A call from Rachel. My hand shook as I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. There was a brief silence on the other end before I heard her voice, distant and strange, as if she were speaking from far away. "I told you," she whispered. "I told you to be careful. It's too late now." I tried to speak, to ask what she meant, but the line went dead. The call disconnected before I could say anything. I stared at the screen, the silence in the room pressing down on me. What the hell was going on? I quickly called Rachel back, but the phone just rang and rang. No answer. I sent a text, but it was the same, no reply. I sat back down, breathing heavily. Maybe it was all a prank. Maybe she was messing with me, trying to spook me. But this didn't feel like a joke. I decided to go outside to get some air and clear my head. As I stepped outside, the breeze felt colder than usual. I walked down the street, my phone still clutched in my hand. I needed to calm down to make sense of all this. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel: "You shouldn't have gone outside. It's too late. I'm already here." I froze, my blood running cold. I turned around, eyes scanning the street. There was no one there. The street was empty, just as it had been moments before. A wave of panic washed over me. I could feel my pulse racing in my neck. What was happening? Was someone watching me? I ran back to my apartment, my feet pounding against the pavement. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, checking all the windows again. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking, and tried to call Rachel one last time. This time, when the call connected, it wasn't Rachel's voice on the other end. It was static, distorted, buzzing, like something was trying to get through. But then, just as quickly, the line went silent. The screen on my phone flickered, and I saw it. A new message from Rachel. "You shouldn't have tried to call. Now it's your turn." Story 23. I had just grabbed a few items for dinner at the local grocery store. A quick trip I didn't expect to be anything out of the ordinary. The aisles were crowded, but I wasn't in a rush. I pushed my cart down the baking goods section and realized I had forgotten a bag of flour, so I left my cart in place and walked down the adjacent aisle to grab it. When I returned, the first thing I noticed was that something felt off. The cart was exactly where I had left it, but there was something different. The handle, which had been pointed toward me when I left, was now facing away. It didn't make sense. No one would have taken the time to turn it around, but there was no sign that anyone had been near it. I shrugged it off. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it when I walked away. I glanced down at the cart and my gaze froze. There was a note, folded neatly in the seat of the cart. It wasn't there when I left. I was sure of it. I reached down and slowly unfolded the paper. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but still legible. The note read, "Be careful." My blood ran cold as I stared at the words, confusion mixing with a creeping unease. Who would leave such a message for me? I looked around the store. People bustled by, going about their business, none of them paying me any attention. I checked the aisle. The nearby rows, but there was no one watching me, no one who seemed to notice what had just happened. For a moment I thought about going straight to the manager and showing them the note, but what would I even say? That someone had left me an anonymous warning. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the growing panic. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe someone had left it as a joke, hoping to spook a stranger for fun. I crumpled the note in my hand and tossed it into the cart, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at me as I continued down the aisle. I couldn't shake the thought of the note. Who had written it? Why had they left it for me? I kept glancing over my shoulder as I moved through the store, the unease crawling up my spine. There was a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I couldn't focus on my shopping. As I reached the checkout, the cashier greeted me with a friendly smile. She didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. But I did. I was hyper-aware, my senses heightened, the feeling that something was terribly wrong growing with each passing second. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and set the bags down. I pulled out the crumpled note from my pocket and flattened it on the kitchen counter. The handwriting still looked the same, as if it had been written in a hurry, but there was nothing specific about it. No other clues. No sign of who had left it or why. I spent the rest of the evening feeling paranoid, checking the locks, peeking through the blinds every few minutes to make sure no one was outside. I couldn't stop thinking about the message. Be careful. What did it mean? The next day, I returned to the grocery store. My mind kept running over the note, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone was watching me. When I walked through the automatic doors, I half expected to see someone waiting for me, someone who knew exactly what I had done, where I had gone. I walked down the same aisles, retracing my steps from the previous day. I passed the place where I had left my cart. Nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A woman standing near the aisle with the baking goods. She was staring directly at me. I froze. My stomach twisted, and I tried to look away, but her gaze held me captive. She didn't smile, didn't look at anything else, just watched me with an intensity that felt suffocating. I looked back toward the aisle where I had been the day before, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone slip into the shadows. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in that store any longer. The air felt thick, and my hands shook as I grabbed a few items I hadn't planned on buying, just to make it look like I was still shopping. I headed for the checkout, but the woman was still there, watching. As I passed her, she smiled faintly, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. Was she the one who had left the note? It seemed too much of a coincidence, but I couldn't be sure. I was certain that she had been staring at me on purpose, though, like she was waiting for something. When I got home, I tried to brush off the strange encounter, but the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. I checked my apartment as if expecting someone to be hiding inside. The note had unnerved me more than I wanted to admit. It was a simple message, but it had shaken me to my core. That night, I locked all the windows and doors, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept my lights dim, moving quietly around my apartment, trying not to draw attention. I felt like the walls were closing in. It wasn't until a week later that things started to get really strange. I had almost forgotten about the note and the woman in the grocery store when it happened again. Another note appeared, this time on my car windshield. It was identical to the first one. Just 2 words, "Be careful." My heart raced as I stood there, staring at the note. No one had been near my car. No one had followed me. And yet there it was again. It was a warning. But from who? And why? I drove straight to the police station, showing them the note and telling them about my experience. The officer listened, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Just ignore it," he said. "It's probably a prank. People leave notes all the time. You're overthinking it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a prank. Someone knew something I didn't. Someone was watching me, and whatever they wanted, it was coming closer. Story 24. The flight had been long, and I was relieved when I finally arrived at the baggage claim area. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, The conveyor belt started moving, and passengers crowded around, eagerly looking for their bags. I scanned the luggage as it passed by, looking for my black suitcase. When I saw it, I reached out, relieved to see it was indeed mine. But then I noticed something odd. A small white luggage tag was attached to the handle. It wasn't the usual tag I'd filled out at check-in. It was a blank tag with someone else's name printed on it, Emily Thompson. The name didn't look familiar at all. I froze, my hand still gripping the handle of the suitcase, and my stomach dropped. I pulled the suitcase off the conveyor belt, glancing around the area. No one seemed to notice, but the more I stared at the tag, the more I felt like something was wrong. I checked the tag again, reading the name carefully. Emily Thompson. I didn't know anyone by that name, and I certainly hadn't put that name on any of my luggage. I looked at the tag more closely. The writing looked clean, like it had been printed on a computer, and the tag itself didn't look like something that had been worn or torn from normal travel use. I quickly ran my fingers over it, expecting to find the typical paper texture, but it felt strange smooth, almost like plastic. I glanced around the baggage claim area again, trying to spot anyone who might be looking for a bag with that name on it. No one seemed to be paying any attention to me, so I decided to head to the nearest customer service desk. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to the counter. "I think there's been a mistake. My suitcase has the wrong luggage tag." The attendant, a young woman with dark hair, looked at me, her expression polite but neutral. "What's the issue?" I held up the tag. "This isn't my name. The tag says Emily Thompson, but this is my suitcase. I don't know anyone by that name." She examined the tag for a moment, then looked up at me. "Let me check the records for you." She typed something into her computer and waited for a few moments. "I don't see anything here with that name associated with your luggage," she said, furrowing her brow. "Are you sure it was the right tag when you checked in?" "Yes," I said, my voice tightening. "I remember putting my name on the tag. It definitely said my name, not Emily Thompson." The attendant nodded and apologized for the inconvenience. "We'll need to file a report to investigate, but I don't see any reason why this would happen. Are you sure you picked up the right bag?" I glanced down at the suitcase. The black leather was worn and scratched in places, but there was no doubt in my mind that it was mine. It had my initials engraved on the side, and I immediately recognized the small tear on the corner where it had gotten caught on a conveyor belt in the past. "I'm sure it's mine," I said. She nodded and began typing into her computer. "I'll just need a few details from you and we'll get this sorted out. We'll also need to check the tags on any other bags that came through." As she filed the report, I stood there, feeling more and more uneasy. The suitcase felt heavy in my hand, as if it were full of secrets I didn't know. Why was the tag changed? Who was Emily Thompson? When I finished filing the report, the attendant assured me that they would investigate and asked me to wait for a call within the next 24 hours. As I left the desk, I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but the strange feeling didn't go away. I kept thinking about the name Emily Thompson. Why had my suitcase been switched? I returned to my hotel room, hoping to put the bizarre incident behind me. But as I unpacked, I kept thinking about the luggage tag. I wondered if it had somehow been switched during the flight, or if someone else had made a mistake. But the tag didn't look like a mistake. It felt intentional, as if someone had swapped the name on purpose. I decided to call my family later that evening, hoping to distract myself from the unsettling thought. As I spoke to my mom, I told her about the luggage tag mix-up. She didn't seem as concerned as I was, but I could tell she was confused. "That's odd," she said. "Maybe it was a mistake at the airport." "But how could they not have a record of it?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "They didn't find anything about Emily Thompson in their system." My mom was silent for a moment. "That doesn't sound right. You should check the suitcase again. Maybe something else will explain it." I hung up and decided to open the suitcase completely. As I began to empty it, I noticed something strange at the bottom, an envelope. It was an ordinary envelope, yellowed with age, and tucked beneath a pair of shoes. My heart raced as I picked it up, wondering what it was doing in my bag. I tore it open carefully, pulling out a small sheet of paper. Written on it was a single line: "I hope you're ready to find out what you've been looking for." I blinked at the message, my mind racing. What did that mean? I hadn't been looking for anything. Had someone planted this in my suitcase? And why did it feel so ominous? I put the note aside and continued to unpack, my hands trembling. As I unpacked the rest of the bag, I found more oddities, small items that didn't belong to me, like a keychain with a hotel logo I didn't recognize, a receipt for something I hadn't bought, and a book that I didn't remember ever owning. By the time I finished unpacking, my head was spinning. My suitcase was filled with things that didn't belong to me, and the luggage tag with Emily Thompson's name seemed more and more like a clue to something I couldn't understand. The next day, I returned to the airport, hoping to get more answers. But when I approached the customer service desk again, the attendant was gone. I asked about the investigation, but no one knew anything about my report. There was no record of the mix-up, and there was no one who could explain how the name had gotten onto my tag. I left the airport feeling more lost than before. The suitcase, the note, the mysterious items, nothing made sense. The only thing I knew for sure was that someone else had been involved in this, and somehow, their story had crossed paths with mine. Story 25. The old house had always been quiet. The kind of quiet where you could hear every creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I had moved in a few months ago, drawn to its charm and the peaceful neighborhood. Everything about the house felt like it belonged to another time except for one thing: the doorbell. It had stopped working the day I moved in. I don't know what happened to it, but no matter how many times I pushed the button, there was nothing. At first it was an inconvenience, but soon it became something I barely noticed. I'd get deliveries and guests, and we'd just knock on the door or call ahead. That's why on an otherwise quiet evening, when the doorbell rang, it stopped me in my tracks. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when the shrill chime echoed through the house. For a split second, I thought I was imagining it, but then it rang again, louder this time. I put the book down and walked to the door. My heart pounded in my chest. The button was broken, and I hadn't heard any contractors working on it. There was no reason it should be working now. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just the empty porch, the overgrown lawn, and the setting sun casting long shadows over everything. I stepped outside, scanning the street for anyone who might have been walking by, but I was alone. Perplexed, I closed the door and went back inside. Maybe it had been a malfunction, I thought, some odd coincidence. But then the thought nagged at me: the doorbell had never worked in months. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and tried to push it out of my mind. But the doorbell rang again, just as I took my first sip. My hand froze, the mug halfway to my lips. It was impossible. I could feel my pulse quickening as I set the mug down on the counter and walked toward the door again. This time, when I opened it, I peered out into the empty yard, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had rung it. There was nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone in the area. The air was still, and the evening sky had darkened with the approach of night. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. Something wasn't right. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe something had jarred the mechanism loose after all these months. But that didn't sit well with me. The doorbell had been completely dead. There was no explanation for why it would suddenly be working now. I decided to investigate. I went into the hallway closet where I kept a small toolbox and pulled out a screwdriver. With determined hands, I unscrewed the doorbell's cover. Beneath it, the wires were a mess of tangled copper and plastic. No sign of any repairs, no indication that the button had been touched in years. It looked exactly as it had the day I moved and completely inactive. I checked the fuse box, then traced the wiring outside to make sure nothing had been tampered with. Everything appeared untouched, just as it had been since I first arrived. My mind was working overtime now, trying to connect the dots, trying to make sense of it. As I stood there, examining the wiring, I heard something faint. A low, muffled voice coming from outside. It sounded almost like someone was whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart skipped a beat. I turned off the lights and pressed my back against the wall, peeking through the curtains. There was nothing. No shadowy figures, no shapes moving in the yard. Just a quiet street stretching out into the darkness. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I had to do something. The doorbell was working, even though it shouldn't have been. And now, there was a voice I couldn't explain. I decided to wait, hiding behind the curtain. Maybe, just maybe, I could catch whoever was messing with me. But the minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Every time a car passed, I tensed, expecting someone to appear at my door. After an hour, I gave up. The street was empty. The house felt still, almost too still. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The quiet was too oppressive, too thick with something I couldn't name. The next day, I called a locksmith, explaining that my doorbell was malfunctioning. The technician arrived, an older man with thick glasses and a patient smile, and I showed him the problem. He glanced at the wiring, tapped the button, and then gave me an odd look. "Looks fine to me," he said, shrugging. "Shouldn't be working at all, really. Maybe it's just old wiring, or the button's finally getting some life back in it." He left after a few minutes, and I was left with a feeling of unease that wouldn't leave. I wasn't sure what had happened that night or why the doorbell had suddenly worked again. But one thing was certain. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been trying to get my attention. As days passed, I tried to forget about it. I put the doorbell out of my mind, convinced it was a fluke. But that night, as I lay in bed, the doorbell rang again. It was the same soft chime, faint and persistent, cutting through the stillness of the house. I could feel my blood run cold. I wasn't going to open the door this time. I wasn't going to let whatever it was in. And then, just like that, it stopped. Story 26. I was walking my dog, Max, down the usual path through the park. It was early in the morning, still cool, and the sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the empty streets. Max was sniffing the ground, his tail wagging happily, as I absent-mindedly checked my phone for messages. As we approached a small, quiet intersection, I noticed a man walking in the opposite direction. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't look like anyone I knew, and the way he moved was almost too calm, as if he didn't have a care in the world. He passed us without breaking stride, but then, just as he was about to walk by, he leaned slightly toward us. And then, in a voice so quiet it almost seemed like a murmur, he said, "Max." It wasn't just any name. It was my dog's name. Max, the name I'd given him when I adopted him years ago. I froze, my blood turning cold. I hadn't told anyone I was out walking him this morning. No one was around, and there was no reason this stranger should know my dog's name. I looked down at Max, who had stopped sniffing the ground. His ears were perked up, and his tail had gone still, as if he was listening too. But the man didn't stop. He kept walking as though nothing had happened, disappearing down the path, his footsteps soft and quick on the pavement. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just occurred. "Did you hear that, Max?" I whispered, bending down to look at him. Max wagged his tail once, then continued sniffing, as if nothing unusual had happened. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I didn't know why, but I felt a growing sense of unease. I shook my head and forced myself to keep walking. It was probably nothing. People walked past us all the time in the park, and I'd heard all sorts of things in my life. Maybe the guy had overheard me calling Max's name earlier, or maybe it was a strange coincidence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the man to turn around and start following us. When we reached the end of the path, I made a left to head back toward home, trying to push the encounter from my mind. But as I walked, I found myself looking over my shoulder more and more, still expecting to see him. It wasn't like I thought he'd hurt me, but something about the way he'd known Max's name, without any reason, unsettled me. The rest of the walk passed in a blur, with Max pulling me along, oblivious to my growing unease. By the time we reached our building, I was mentally exhausted, and I couldn't help but glance at the street one more time, half expecting to see the man standing there, watching us. I told myself it was nothing. I was overthinking it. But the next day, as I was walking Max again, the man appeared once more. This time I was more prepared. I'd seen him from a distance, and when I saw him approaching, I instinctively held Max's leash tighter, trying to maintain a safe distance. As he walked past, I hoped he wouldn't say anything this time. But just as before, his voice drifted toward me. "Max," he whispered. I froze again, the blood draining from my face. This time I turned to look at him as he continued on his way, his eyes never meeting mine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. "Hey," I called after him, my voice shaky. "How do you know his name?" The man didn't answer. He didn't even slow down. He simply walked away, disappearing around the corner as if I hadn't spoken at all. I stood there for a few moments, the leash in my hand trembling. Max barked, seemingly oblivious to my confusion, and tugged on the leash, wanting to continue our walk. I didn't want to go after him. I didn't want to engage with a stranger who seemed to know too much. So I turned around and walked back home, my mind racing. The encounter replayed in my head over and over. How had he known Max's name? Had he somehow been watching us? Had he seen me around the neighborhood? I couldn't come up with any reasonable explanation. My mind raced, spinning in circles as I tried to make sense of it all. That night, I told my roommate, Chloe, about the man. She laughed at first, thinking it was some weird coincidence, but I could tell she was listening more closely when I described how the man seemed so nonchalant, like he knew us. "Maybe he's a dog lover or something," Chloe suggested. Maybe he overheard you call Max's name and just remembered it. I don't know, I replied. It just felt off. Chloe shrugged but agreed to walk Max with me the next morning. She told me it'd be nice to have company, and I appreciated her offer. I didn't like the idea of going back out there alone, especially after what had happened. The next day, the man didn't appear. Max and I finished our walk in peace, and I began to feel like maybe I had been imagining things. Maybe it had all been one weird fluke. But the following week, I saw him again. He wasn't whispering anymore, but this time he was standing across the street, watching me with an intense, unblinking stare. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, hands deep in his pockets, and watched us. I walked faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Max barked at the stranger, but I was too scared to stop. I kept my eyes on the man as I crossed the street, my thoughts racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't. From that day forward, every walk felt different. I kept expecting him to appear, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. And when I looked back at Max, his calm, happy face seemed unaware of the strange man who seemed to know him far too well. Story 27. I hadn't seen that old journal in years. It was tucked away in a dusty box at the back of my closet, buried beneath piles of forgotten items. I had almost forgotten about it, to be honest. But one afternoon, as I was cleaning out the closet, I came across the leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the edges of the pages frayed from time. I couldn't resist the urge to open it. As I flipped through the pages, the familiar handwriting greeted me. It was a younger version of myself, thoughts on everything from school to friendships, to the kind of small, everyday moments that seemed so important back then. The entries were filled with teenage angst, hopes, and dreams. I smiled, remembering how much I had poured into that journal when I was younger, how it had been my secret space to confess everything. But as I neared the back of the journal, I noticed something odd. The last entry wasn't finished. It ended abruptly mid-sentence. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. It wasn't like me to stop writing. I always finished what I started, especially in this journal. The sentence was something about a new experience I was excited about, something I had been anticipating. But the words simply stopped, with no explanation. I turned the page, expecting to see more, but there was nothing. The next page was blank. My heart began to race as I scanned the page again, looking for any clues. I could almost feel the weight of the moment, the finality of that unfinished thought. How could I have just stopped? The last time I'd written in this journal, I hadn't felt like I was leaving something unsaid. I tried to recall what had been going on in my life at that time. The date on the entry was from 5 years ago. It had been during a period of change, though I couldn't quite place the specifics. My mind was foggy when it came to that year, and the more I thought about it, the less certain I became of the details. But I had never remembered being so distracted that I just stopped writing mid-sentence. I felt a creeping unease settle in as I tried to piece together the memory. What had happened that day? I tried to remember what I had been doing, who I had been with. The more I thought, the more distant everything felt, like a dream slipping through my fingers. I couldn't remember why I had written in the journal that night, or what had been so important that I had left a sentence hanging. I shut the journal and set it aside for a moment, my mind spinning. Something didn't feel right. I had always been meticulous about keeping up with my writing, especially in that journal. The thought of leaving an entry unfinished felt foreign to me. What could have happened to make me stop? I decided to ask my friends from that time, thinking they might be able to jog my memory. I called Sarah first, one of my closest friends back then. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm as always. "Hey, long time no talk. What's up?" I explained the situation, telling her about the journal and the unfinished read. She was quiet for a moment before she responded. "I don't really remember much from that time either, to be honest. It was all a blur, wasn't it? A lot of things happened that year." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean, a lot of things?" She hesitated. "I don't know. There were just a lot of changes. We all had our own stuff going on, you know." Her tone sounded almost evasive. I pressed her for more, but she didn't have much to add. It was like she was avoiding the subject. I called a few other friends from that time, but none of them had any clear memories either. It was as if that year had been erased from all of our minds, and the more I asked about it, the more unsettled I felt. Why was it so hard to recall anything about that time? The next day, I went back to the journal. I opened to the last entry again and stared at the unfinished sentence. I could almost hear my younger self's voice in my head, as if she was still there, trying to finish what she had started. I read the sentence over and over, but the words didn't make any more sense. My mind kept returning to the same question: why did I stop writing? That night, I had a strange dream. I was back in my old room, sitting on my bed with the journal in front of me. I could hear my own voice, reading aloud the last sentence from the journal. But as I spoke, the words began to change. The sentence morphed into something else entirely, something darker. It was as if the journal had taken on a life of its own, bending the past to its will. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. The room was dark, the silence suffocating. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. Then I remembered the journal, and I immediately reached for it. I flipped it open, half expecting to see the page from my dream. But it was just the same unfinished entry, still as it had been before. The more I thought about it, the more the idea gnawed at me. What if the journal wasn't just a record of my thoughts? What if something more had happened that day, something that I had blocked out? It felt like there was a hidden memory lurking just beyond my reach, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn back to something I wasn't ready to face. The journal had always been a safe place for me to express myself, but now it felt like a door to something I had forgotten, something I wasn't supposed to remember. I shut the journal again and placed it back in the box, but the unease lingered. Days passed, and I tried to move on, but the journal sat on my shelf staring at me, daring me to pick it up again. I wanted to know the truth, to understand why I had stopped writing, but part of me was terrified of what I might uncover. It was as if that unfinished entry was the last piece of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve, and I couldn't help but wonder if some things were better left unsaid. Story 28. I was tired. After a long day at work, the last thing I wanted was to deal with any kind of problem. The walk home felt like a blur, the chill of the evening air cutting through my jacket, making me shiver as I hurried to the front door. I fumbled for my keys in my bag, my fingers clumsy from exhaustion. Finally, I found the familiar cold metal of my house key and slipped it from the keychain. The key was a little worn, the edges dulled from years of use, but it had always worked before. I slid it into the lock, expecting the familiar click, but this time there was no click. The key didn't turn, no matter how much I twisted. I pulled it out and examined it briefly, wondering if the teeth had gotten too worn down to work properly. I turned the key around, trying again from the other side, but nothing. I stood there for a moment, staring at the key as if it had betrayed me. I tried again, this time jiggling the key in the lock, hoping for some kind of miracle. It was as if the lock itself had changed overnight, as if the key in the lock had somehow become incompatible. My frustration began to rise. What was going on? I took a step back and looked at the door, almost expecting to see something different about it. But everything appeared normal, nothing out of place, nothing unusual. I was standing in front of the same house I had lived in for the past 2 years. The porch light flickered above me, and the smell of the old wood and damp earth was as familiar as my own reflection. There was no reason why my key shouldn't work. Maybe I was just too tired. I decided to give it another try, hoping that some sense of calm would return, and I'd finally get the door open. But no matter how I twisted or turned the key, it refused to cooperate. Panic began to creep in. This was the key to my house. It had worked countless times before. Why was it failing me now? Frustration gnawed at my patience as I stood there, staring at the door, almost willing it to open on its own. I considered calling my landlord, but then I remembered that it was late, far too late for anyone to answer. With a sigh, I pulled the key out and stuffed it back in my bag, unsure of what to do next. That's when I noticed something strange. Just across the street, I saw a man walking toward me. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He walked with purpose, his steps quick and steady, but something about the way he was moving unsettled me. He didn't seem to notice me at first, but as he neared my house, his gaze flickered to the front door. Our eyes met briefly, and then he looked away, continuing on his path. It wasn't the glance that bothered me, it was the feeling that lingered in the air afterward, like he had been watching me long before I noticed him. I dismissed the thought as paranoia, but the feeling wouldn't leave. I watched him disappear around the corner, but the unease remained. I glanced at my key again, as if it might somehow offer an explanation, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel ridiculous, standing there in front of my own home, unable to get inside. My eyes scanned the door one more time, and that's when I noticed something else, something that hadn't been there before. There was a faint scratch mark on the surface of the door, just below the handle. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't deep, but it was definitely noticeable, as if something had scraped across the wood. I leaned in closer, inspecting it. There was no reason for it to be there, no explanation that made sense. My heart began to race. Had someone tried to break in? But nothing seemed disturbed. The door, the lock, everything was still in its place. I stepped back, my mind spinning. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself that I was overthinking things, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. My key still didn't work. The scratch mark on the door still bothered me, and now I couldn't shake the memory of that man across the street. I needed to get inside. I pulled my phone out of my bag, ready to call a locksmith, but as I scrolled through my contacts, my fingers stopped. The screen blinked with an odd notification, a text message from an unknown number. I opened it without thinking, curious. The message was short, just a few words: "I've been waiting for you." My blood ran cold. I checked the time, it was barely 9:30 p.m. I hadn't given anyone my number, especially not a stranger. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that it was a wrong number, or maybe some kind of prank. But the message felt too specific, too direct. I looked around the street, half expecting to see someone watching me. There was no one. It was too quiet. Even the sound of the wind had died down, leaving nothing but an eerie stillness in the air. My hands trembled as I typed a reply, asking who they were, but the message wouldn't send. I tried again and again, but it was as if my phone had suddenly stopped working. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and stared at the door. The key was still in my bag, but I didn't want to try it again. I couldn't. I had a sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong with this place, with this house. The door in front of me looked different now, as if it no longer belonged to me, as if it had changed overnight, becoming something foreign, something that didn't recognize me. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like I was standing in front of the wrong house entirely. I didn't know what to do. It was my house, but it wasn't my house. I tried the key again, and for the first time that night, it slid smoothly into the lock. Story 29. It was late in the evening when I stopped at the gas station. I was on the way home from a long drive. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and dark. I needed to refuel, and the gas station was the only one for miles. I pulled into the pumps, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead casting long shadows. The place looked deserted, save for a few cars parked at the other pumps. I had just started filling my tank when I noticed him. He was standing a few feet away, near the air pump, his gaze fixed on me. I hadn't seen him pull in, and he didn't seem to be doing anything, just standing there, watching. His presence was unsettling, but I told myself it was nothing. People stopped at gas stations for all kinds of reasons. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the task at hand. But then, without warning, he took a few steps toward me. His movements were slow, almost deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I froze, my hand tightening around the gas nozzle as I looked up at him. He was taller than I expected, his face weathered and worn, like someone who had spent years on the road. His clothes were plain dark jeans, a worn jacket, and boots that looked like they had seen better days. When he spoke, his voice was low, raspy, but strangely calm. "I saw you last week," he said. I blinked, confused. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The words hung in the air between us, thick with something I couldn't quite place. "I saw you last week," he repeated, taking another step closer. He wasn't threatening, but there was something about the way he said it, like he knew something I didn't. My heart started to race as I tried to process his words. I had never seen this man before. I had never been to this gas station until tonight. "Listen, I think you're mistaken," I said, my voice tight. I glanced around, wondering if anyone else was nearby, but the station was still as quiet as before. There were no cars in the lot except mine. It was just me, him, and the endless stretch of highway beyond. He didn't seem to care that I was confused. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on me, his expression unreadable. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He just looked serious. "I saw you last week," he said again, his gaze never wavering. "You were at the truck stop. I saw you there." I felt a chill creep up my spine. I had never been to a truck stop. I had never stopped at any gas station other than this one, not for as long as I could remember. I racked my brain, trying to think back to the past week, trying to remember if I had stopped anywhere else, if I had seen anyone like him. But nothing came to mind. I hadn't been anywhere near a truck stop. "No, I haven't," I said, a little more forcefully this time, stepping back. "I've never been to any truck stop. I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't respond right away. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. I could feel the tension building, the air around us thick with the weight of the situation. I didn't know what to make of him or what he wanted. His eyes were too intense, and the fact that he was so insistent about something I knew wasn't true unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. Finally, he spoke again, his voice even quieter now. You were there. I saw you talking to someone. You were standing by a red car." I felt my stomach twist. The red car part was something I couldn't even pretend to recognize. But the way he spoke, with such certainty, made me feel like I was missing something. I tried to force myself to think clearly. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he thought I was someone else. But that wasn't the feeling I got from him. This man wasn't confused, he was sure. "I'm sorry. I think you got the wrong person," I said, my voice shaking a little despite myself. I stepped back, the nozzle still in my hand, but I felt frozen in place. He took another step forward, and for a moment, I thought he might actually touch me. I instinctively backed up, my hand reaching for my phone in my pocket, just in case I needed to call someone. But before I could even pull it out, he stopped. He tilted his head slightly, as if contemplating something. "You don't remember," he said, almost like he was talking to himself. His eyes softened for just a moment, before they sharpened again. "But you were there. I'll see you again soon." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, unsure of what to do next. The man turned and walked away, slowly, without another word. He didn't get in a car, didn't head toward any of the nearby exits. He just walked across the empty lot, heading toward the edge of the station. I watched him go, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood frozen for several seconds, staring after him before I forced myself to turn back to my car. My hands were trembling as I finished pumping the gas, but I couldn't seem to focus on anything. The only thing that kept running through my mind was what he had said. "I saw you last week." As I got into my car and started the engine, I glanced out the window one last time. The man had disappeared. The lot was empty once again. I drove away slowly, but my mind kept racing. What had just happened? Who was that guy? And why did he seem so certain about something I knew wasn't true? The whole drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just brushed against something I didn't understand. Something that had nothing to do with chance or coincidence, or even logic. There was a deeper layer to this, one I wasn't ready to uncover, and as much as I wanted to forget it, I couldn't. Story 30. I was pushing my cart down the frozen foods aisle, mindlessly scanning the rows of brightly colored boxes. The store was quiet, almost eerily so for a Saturday afternoon. There was a dull hum from the refrigeration units, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted from the bakery section across the store. My fingers brushed against the cool glass of the freezer door as I moved past it, searching for frozen vegetables. Then I caught my reflection in the glass. At first, I barely noticed it, focused on the items in the display case. But then I blinked, and something felt off. My reflection didn't move with me. I stood still, staring at it for a split second. My reflection was perfectly still, eyes locked with mine, even though I had shifted a little to the right. It was almost as if it was frozen in time. I took a step back, heart suddenly racing. I could feel the weight of my pulse pounding in my ears. I looked again, certain that I was mistaken, but the reflection in the freezer door still remained frozen, as if it was a split second behind. I tried to move slowly, a little to the left this time, testing it. Sure enough, my reflection stayed motionless, its gaze fixed in a way that felt wrong. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting in knots. Was it some kind of trick of the light? A reflection that had been distorted by the glass? I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. But deep down, I knew this was more than just a strange optical illusion. Something was off. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing behind me, messing with the glass. But the aisle was empty. The longer I stared at the reflection, the more unsettling it became. It didn't match the subtle movements I was making. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and pressed it against the freezer door. The cold glass felt solid beneath my fingertips. My reflection still didn't move. I stepped away, my heart racing now. I tried to focus on the groceries in my cart, but my mind kept drifting back to the reflection. I could feel my breath quicken as I grabbed a bag of frozen peas, only to see that my reflection in the glass was still staring back at me, unmoving. I looked down the aisle at the other shoppers who seemed oblivious to everything around them. It was as if I was trapped in my own little world, my reality broken in some subtle, invisible way. I had to shake it off. This was just a trick of the mind, nothing more. But when I looked again, the reflection wasn't the same. It was smiling now. A slow, deliberate grin that didn't match my own expression at all. The reflection wasn't just frozen, it had changed. My stomach twisted violently, and I felt a cold sweat begin to form on the back of my neck. Without thinking, I turned and walked quickly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the quiet store. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a glitch. But the image of that smile, wide, unsettling, kept flashing in my mind. I reached the checkout counter, trying to ignore the anxiety crawling through me. The cashier smiled at me, unaware of the strange event that had just unfolded. I paid quickly, grabbing my bag, eager to leave. But as I walked toward the exit, I couldn't help but glance back at the freezer aisle. For a brief moment, I thought I saw my reflection, still there in the door, staring out at me. But this time it was following me. I froze for a split second, feeling the blood drain from my face. My reflection, no, the reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was someone else, someone standing exactly where I had been just moments before, grinning with that unnerving smile. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself to keep walking, my pace quickening as I headed for the automatic doors. I didn't dare look back again, not wanting to confirm what I had just seen. The air outside was crisp, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see someone or something staring back at me. The reflection in the mirror, though, remained mine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that I wasn't alone, even though I was certain I was. I parked in my driveway, hands shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, staring at my front door, debating whether I should go back inside or just drive away, get out of town, maybe forget everything I'd just experienced. But I knew I couldn't. With a deep breath, I grabbed my groceries and stepped out of the car. As I walked to the door, I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a shadow, a frame. I froze, heart slamming in my chest. For a moment, I stood there, too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. Then, slowly, I turned my head. There, in the window of the house across the street, was a reflection. But it wasn't a reflection of anyone in the house. It was a reflection of me standing on the front step of my own home, staring out from the window of someone else's house. I blinked and turned away, forcing myself to go inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my hands trembling as I leaned against it. I couldn't explain what had happened in the store. I couldn't explain the strange reflection or how it had moved when I didn't. All I knew was that whatever it wasn't over. I could still feel its presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting to return. The smile, that damn smile, It was like a shadow that had followed me home. And it wasn't going away.